Time has expired.
Deeply wrong, sir.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rabbi, do you believe there are a substantial number of people at Harvard University who believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, and the right to harass Jews?
I do.
That's a yes.
Yes.
And do you believe those people have acted on their self-anointed right to harass Jews?
Yes.
And has the administration at Harvard University allowed that to happen?
Yes.
Is that true at University of California at Berkeley?
Yes.
How about UCLA?
Yes.
How about NYU?
Yes.
A lot of other universities too. Isn't that the case?
That is correct.
Now, Title VI says that if you receive federal money, you can't harass Jews. Isn't that true?
That is correct.
Has the Biden-Harris administration taken away the money of Harvard?
No.
How about Berkeley?
Nope.
How about UCLA?
No, sir.
How about NYU?
No.
They've just talked, haven't they?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you think this condoned behavior at these universities, this condoned belief at these universities, and let me state it again, they believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, and the right to harass Jews. That's what they believe. What you do is what you believe. Everything else is just cottage cheese. Do you think that is consistent with their mission as universities?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So above and beyond the question of money, it is the morality, the purpose of higher education in America, is it not?
That is correct.
Ms. Berry, you are the executive director of the Arab American Institute. Is that correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay. And according to your website, you're also, I'm going to quote here, a longtime Democratic Party activist who served as a member of the 2016 Democratic National Convention's Platform Standing Committee, close quote. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You support Hamas, do you not?
Senator, oddly enough, I'm going to say thank you for that question because it demonstrates the purpose of our hearing today in a very effective way.
Let's start first with a yes or no.
Hamas is a foreign terrorist organization that I do not support, but you asking the executive director of the Arab American Institute that question very much puts the focus on the issue of hate in our country.
Well, I got your answer, and I appreciate it. What is the, you support Hezbollah too, don't you?
Again, I find this line of questioning extraordinarily disappointing,
Is that a
Senator.
no?
That
Or
you have Arab American constituents that you represent in your great state.
Yes, ma'am, I understand that, but my time's limited, and I apologize, but is that a yes or a no?
A yes or no question to do I support Hezbollah? The answer is I don't support violence, whether it's Hezbollah, Hamas, or any other entity that invokes it.
You can't
so
bring
no,
yourself
sir.
to say no, can you?
No, I can say no. I can say yes.
But
what
you
I
haven't.
can say is
You just
your
can't
line
make
of
yourself
questioning.
do it. Do you
Senator,
support or oppose Iran and their hatred of Jews?
Again, I'm going to emphasize Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, none of them is going to,
You can't bring yourself to say no, can
Sir,
you?
I don't support.
It's real simple.
Excuse me. I'm going to,
Ian,
if I may, as a Muslim woman, sir, I'm going to tell you I do not support Iran. But what I will tell you is that this conversation.
I'm running out of time. I'm
Okay.
sorry. You called our decision to cut funding. You called our decision to cut fund. Well, first, what's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency?
It's UNRWA, which is
Yeah.
the institution that exists to provide services and aid to the nearly 6 million Palestinian refugees.
And you called our decision to cut funding for them, quote, an incredible moral failure, close quote.
That is absolutely correct. But again, I would suggest that conversation is about foreign policy.
We did that because 9 UNRWA staff members were fired for actually helping Hamas on October 7th. Isn't that the case?
I don't believe that that's correct in terms
Let
of...
me ask you one more
please.
time. You support Hamas, don't you? You
Sir.
support UNRWA and Hamas, don't you?
Sir,
Please.
I think it's exceptionally disappointing that you're looking at an Arab American witness before you and saying you support Hamas.
You know what's disappointing to me?
I do not support
You can't
Hamas.
bring yourself
I do
to
not
say
support Hamas
you don't
or
support UNRWA. You don't support Hamas. You don't.
was very
support
clear in my support for UNRWA.
Hezbollah, and you don't
I
support Iran.
oppose-
You should hide your head in a bag.
Your time has expired. Please, Ms. Berry, I'm going to allow you to respond to any one or all of those questions at this point.
Senator Durban, thank you very much for holding this hearing and for elevating the issue of hate crime. It's regrettable that as I sit here, have experienced the very issue that we're attempting to deal with today. The introduction of foreign policy is not how we keep Arab Americans or Jewish Americans or Muslim Americans or Black people or Asian Americans, anybody safe. This has been regrettably a real disappointment, but very much an indication of the danger to our democratic institutions that we're in now. And I deeply regret that, and I do hope that my testimony today has been helpful to understanding the need to respond to hate.
Over the weekend, I went to a synagogue in my hometown of Springfield. There was a bar mitzvah for a dear friend of mine. I couldn't help but notice the security guards that were posted for this bar mitzvah. In addition, I went to a meeting where a dear friend of mine, a Jewish friend of mine in Chicago, she's been my friend and worked for me for 40 years, was almost in tears over the anti-Semitism that she has witnessed. She was wearing a Star of David around her neck. And she said, I do that because I won't give up. I won't give up. I thought about it for this hearing, but I also thought about Wadia, a 6-year-old boy. I have a 5-year-old granddaughter. I love her like life itself. I cannot imagine this poor little boy answering the door and losing his life because he's Palestinian. My God, we can't say those things that I've just said in the same sentence without some people saying, oh, you've just chosen sides. I'm not choosing sides here except for the side of, I hope, common decency and democracy. We've got to have this conversation. We've got to do it in a civilized manner. I regret some of the things that were said today at this hearing. But we are a free nation, and that's what happens in a democracy. As sad and as disquieting as it may be, that is part of it. The title of today's hearing was inspired by Dr. King's. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see Senator Blackburn. I was just concluding. Senator, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You've been really vocal in calling for both what is described as Ghislaine Maxwell's Little Black Book, as well as the flight logs to be subpoenaed, to be unredacted. You wrote a letter to Senator Dick Durbin last week requesting that these be subpoenaed. Has he responded?
I have not heard from Senator Durbin. Of course, he's the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he has previously twice blocked my call for a subpoena and a vote at committee on this. We have heard that he said he's willing to work with me on a bipartisan basis, but we would like for him to step forward and support the subpoena request to the Epstein estate.
I just want to get to the bottom of this for my viewers. What or who stands in the way of getting these flight logs released? Are you saying it's Senator Dick Durbin?
We know that it will take a subpoena, so getting a vote on that and having the committee back asking for these, issuing the subpoena to the state, to Jeffrey Epstein's estate. That's going to be an important step. That's one that we need to do. Also to the FBI, making certain that we can get these other documents. This is information that the FBI has not been forthcoming on. I was very disappointed in Mr. Ray's response to me when he was before us at the committee hearing. And as the head of the FBI, leading that organization, for him to say, well, he hadn't really looked at the Jeffrey Epstein case in quite a while, that was disappointing. So we need their attention on this. This human trafficking and sex trafficking that's taking place, this is modern day slavery. So their support, the committee support, is going to be important to get these documents, to have that transparency, and begin to hold these traffickers accountable, and for the wrongdoing that they have done, to see their prosecution take place.
I do want to talk about Christopher Wray in just a moment, the FBI director. But before that, are there any other Democrats on the Judiciary Committee that you could team up with to get these flight logs released?
We are talking with several of the committee members. We would love to have their support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number one, as to the recent apparent attempt on President Trump's life, I do want to thank the Secret Service agents on the ground for acting quickly and responsibly. But when I heard the acting director say the system worked, I could not disagree more. It did not work. You can't have a man camped out by the golf course for 12 hours with an AK-47 and a scope on it and say the system worked. We're just very fortunate he stuck the barrel through the fence before the president got to the golf hole in question. I want to applaud the Secret Service agent who saw the barrel, but this could have been a completely different story if the man had just waited, saw President Trump, then acted. The system is just broken. I don't know if it's resources. I asked the acting director before. He said they're fine. I don't buy that. Agents tell me they're working tremendous hours. I'd like to have more agents, not less. I'd like to get the Secret Service back into Treasury where they were more focused. But we'll talk about that another day. I'm just glad we didn't have a worse outcome, but I think the system is broken. As to our hearing today, on May the 2nd, 2024, all Republicans wrote a letter to Chairman Durban. We implore you to promptly hold a Judiciary Committee hearing to confront the flagrant civil rights violations targeting Jewish students on college campuses across America and to expose the radical Islamic ideology infiltrating our universities. The goal was to have a hearing about why it's so hard to go to school if you're Jewish. And it is really hard to go to these schools if you're Jewish. You're being knocked down, you're being spat on. It is just completely out of control. This is not the hearing we're getting, so we'll work with what we've got. The House has had 10 hearings focused on anti-Semitism, on the rise like it was in the 30s, in my view. We're not talking about fringe elements within any one group or crazy people. They exist throughout society. What happened to the 6-year-old is just horrible. The man will get whatever comes his way, and to me, it's not enough. I'm trying to focus on a systematic problem. America has a systematic problem on college campuses. It is being funded, the DNI says, not by Qatar, but by Iran. So we have to deal with this. This committee should act not just in general, but specifically about what it's like to be Jewish in America in 2024. And it is not a good story. So I want to introduce into the record the original request, if I may, and also introduce in the record a letter I've got from the Union of Jewish Congregation of Americans. If I may introduce both letters, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Okay. Now, the problem is really unnerving. 2.4% of Americans are Jewish. 60% of all religious-based hate crimes have been directed against the Jewish people. There's something going on here that needs to be addressed and better dealt with, and people in charge of these universities need to be held more accountable. As to what I'm trying to do, I've been working since last April with the Biden administration to find a way to normalize between Saudi Arabia and the State of Israel. That, to me, is the answer to many problems that we face, Israel faces, and I'm a strong advocate for ending the Arab-Israeli conflict. And a beneficiary of that would be a Palestinian community better treated, not run by terrorists, with a more hopeful life and a secure Israel. Count me in for trying to end conflict. Count me in for trying to reconcile the Arab and Jewish communities in the Mideast and anywhere else. That's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about a rise throughout the world, but particularly here, against the Jewish people. Examples of what you face: Columbia University in Fada, Stanford University, somebody wearing a Hamas headband, Princeton University, the Hamas material, Union Station, July the 24th. Hamas is coming. This is all over the country right now. And let me just say this. Hamas is a homicidal terrorist group dedicated not to uplifting the Palestinian people, but destroying the state of Israel. So when you write Hamas, you're either one of two things: blatantly anti-Semitic or dumb as a rock. I'll let you pick. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Everybody should condemn Hamas, not use their name routinely and hold up their cause throughout college campuses on America. So what I hope we can get started in this country is a conversation about what should be the result of attending a school and being picked upon simply because of your religion, in this case, being Jewish. The next one. One of our witnesses says, calling for the genocide of the state of Israel should not get you disciplined. It should. It should. You know, when David Duke was on colleges' campuses in his time handing out Nazi stuff, he should have been disciplined. I disagree with that. I believe in free speech, but I don't believe advocating for the killing of an entire class of people. That's not free speech. So what we have before us today as a nation is a moment of choosing. We can choose to ignore this, lump it in with every other problem we got in the country, or we can focus on it. I prefer to focus on it. I prefer to let the American Jewish community know enough is enough. We're going to be there for you. We're going to have your back. And we're not rising to the occasion. I would urge my friends on the other side, let's have a hearing focused on this problem, not lumping this problem in with every other problem we have. This is unique to the time in which we live. It is getting out of control. As to rhetoric, yeah, we can all do better. I get that. But this idea that one group is going to destroy America or one person's going to destroy America needs to come to an end. Nobody's going to destroy America. The Iranians would, if they could. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope we can follow up with another hearing focused on our original request, which is combating anti-Semitism on college campuses, making it really difficult if you're a Jewish parent to send your kid to college.
Senator Graham, you and I agree on more than we disagree. And we certainly agree that hate crimes should be treated seriously, whatever their origin, whatever their purpose. They are unacceptable in this nation of ours. Prioritizing which group is being discriminated against the worst, I don't believe is a valid exercise of our authority here. What we are trying to do is to identify a problem in America that extends beyond Jewish population to the Arab population, to the Palestinian population. All of those hate crimes are unacceptable. All of them are unacceptable. The letter which you asked me to enter into the record calls on us to pass a bill that I know of quite well, the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. That bill passed the House of Representatives. It was called by Senator Schumer in the Senate. It's a bill that I sponsored. It was stopped on the floor and filibustered by the Republican side. I don't want to draw a conclusion about their views on hatred and violence, but I think we all ought to acknowledge the fact that work needs to be done and we shouldn't tie ourselves in knots, but should work toward ending hate crimes in America. At this point, we're going to turn to the witnesses who appeared before. Member for cooperating in today's markup a little early to avoid conflict with the joint session. We have a long agenda today, including several nominees who've been listed for the first time and will be held over, as is the custom of the committee. They are Judge Nancy Maldonado, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit; Georgia Alexakis, U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois; Krissa Lanham, U.S. District Court for the District of Arizona; Judge Angela Martinez, U.S. District Court for the District of Arizona; Sparkle Suknanan, U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia; Judge Claria Horn-Boom, another term on the U.S. Sentencing Commission; Judge John Gleason, another term on the U.S. Sentencing Commission; Matthew Gannon, to be U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Iowa; David Waterman, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa; and Gary Grimes, Marshal for the Western District of Arkansas. There's also one bill on the agenda to be held over, S-1306, the Cops Reauthorization Act. We'll also vote on 4 judicial nominees and 2 U.S. Marshals. We're hoping to go to the joint session soon. I now turn to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we get to the judges, next week we're supposed to have an impeachment trial of Homeland Secretary, DHS Secretary Mayorkas, who was impeached by the House for failing to do his duties, and it's up to the Senate to do its duty. But apparently what we're going to do is do a motion to table the impeachment process. I don't think he's even been given a summons, and we're going to short-circuit the Senate trial in a way that's never been done in 200-something years. I think there have been 21 people impeached from the House since the late 1797. All of them have had a disposal in the Senate by some form of trial, except one who resigned. But the Democratic majority is going to abandon that. We're not even going to have any debate about the articles. Y'all have decided, for some reason, just to make a motion to table to end it before it starts, which violates every tradition of the Senate. I think it's constitutionally wrong. Just another example of taking the Senate and turning it upside down to get what you want. In 2013, Senator Schumer and Reid started the idea you don't need anything but a simple majority for circuit court judges. That set in motion where we are today on the judiciary. There is just a majority required, that came to head when we were in charge and Gorsuch was filibustered. So the Senate's rule, longstanding rule about getting 60 votes has been abandoned. It started in 2013. Everybody on this committee has voted to change the rules of the Senate to do away with the legislative filibuster making us the House. Now you're going to take the impeachment process and turn it upside down because you just want to get on with it. You don't want to have a trial about whether or not our border is broken to the extent that the man most recently, most directly in charge should be impeached. Bad day for the Senate, just a continuation of the wrecking ball approach y'all have taken to the institution for political purposes. And we may avoid a trial, but you're not going to avoid the issue. The American public, I hope, in November will hold you and the Biden administration accountable for obliterating our border, for allowing it to be chaos on steroids, for creating a situation where smugglers not only are bringing human individuals in from all over the world, they're also facilitating ISIS. I've never seen a situation at the southern border like this. We're at all-time high of illegal crossings. The terrorist threat to this nation is off the charts. We're on pace, if this continues, to have 3.6 million encounters every year. And December was the highest December in the history of the country. And this doesn't count the gotaways that Senator Cornyn talks about all the time. To say it's chaos is just really not justice. It's criminal, really. What you've allowed to happen is a violation of any sense of responsibility by Secretary Mayorkas to protect our country. He's in charge of Homeland Security. And this is what the FBI director said. While there have been many times over the years where individual threats could have been higher here or there, I've never seen a time where all the threats, or so many of the threats, are all elevated at exactly the same time. And so we have a trial pending in the Senate about whether or not the man in charge of the border should be impeached, and we're going to do a table to motion, a motion to table. We won't even talk about the substance of the articles. We won't even summons the guy. We're short-circuiting the process. The first time in 200-something years we've done this, and you're avoiding a discussion about the most important topic I think many Americans are facing. One of the reasons that I think he was impeached, he has absolutely abused the law on parole. Parole is required an individual analysis. 2 factors would allow you to be paroled into the country: unique humanitarian need or some unique ability you have that would help the country. During the Obama-Trump years, 5,600 people on average were paroled into the country. In FY22, 795,000. I think Mayorkas is violating the statute. I don't believe him when he says you do an individual analysis to Laken Riley, the individual that was paroled in. I don't believe for 1 minute they did an individual analysis on why he merited parole. I've asked for his case file. I haven't gotten anything. The reason I haven't gotten anything, I don't think there's anything to give me, and they just don't want to admit it. So, pretty bad day for the Senate. This will be the norm, I guess. You know, President Trump was impeached twice. I'm not asking you to agree with the impeachment of the House. I'm asking you to follow the constitutional process that's been set up for 200-something years. When President Trump was impeached twice, we went through the process. People got to argue about the articles. People got to present evidence, and the trial was disposed of. But here, so I want the American people to know, when it comes to evaluating whether or not Secretary Mayorkas should be impeached, we don't have a chance to do that. We're not even going to get to debate the articles. We're not going to produce any evidence. We're not have any debate about whether this is legitimate. It is going to be stopped before it starts. This is a quasi-judicial hearing. Never in the history of the Senate has this been done, to table the articles of impeachment before the person impeached has even been served. This takes us down the wrong road. It's the first time ever, and unfortunately it probably won't be the last. So the impeachment process now is a victim to the Democratic Party's efforts to get results no matter what the law requires. Very sad.
Immigration is an issue that's subject matter of this committee, and most of us understand that the only progress that's been made on it, even in conversation, is on a bipartisan basis. That's why many of us held out great hope for the Lankford effort, which was asked for by the Republican side. Unfortunately, presidential candidate Donald Trump stepped in and said, I don't want that to go forward. I'd rather have the issue in November, and you can blame me for it. I'm blaming him for it. First is Judge Sanket Bolshara, nominated to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York. Does anyone wish to speak about this nomination? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Sarono.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn. No. Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Judge Dina Coggins, nominated to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of California. Does anyone seek recognition on this nomination?
Mr. Chair, just briefly,
Senator Butler.
This is my first judge that I had the opportunity, a nominee that had the opportunity to work with from the beginning of her process. She has an outstanding career and incredibly deep and meaningful litigation experience. I think she'll be a wonderful addition to our federal judiciary, and I appreciate my colleagues' support of her nomination.
Thank you, Senator Butler. If no one else seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler. Aye. Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. The next nominee is Eric Schulte, U.S. District Court for the District of South Dakota. Does anyone seek recognition? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Aye. Mr. Booker. Aye. Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch. Aye. Ms. Butler. Aye. Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn. No. Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Judge Camilla Teeler, U.S. District Court for the District of South Dakota. If no one seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Aye. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, may I
Senator
ask that
Cornyn?
my vote be changed from no to aye?
That's the
Thank
record
you.
will so reflect.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 20, the nays are 1.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. The next nominee is David Barnett, U.S. Marshal for the District of New Mexico. Does anyone seek recognition on this nomination? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch. Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy. No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
No by proxy.
No by present.
No by present.
Mrs. Blackburn? Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 9.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. And finally, we have Clinton Fuchs, U.S. Marshal for the District of Maryland. If no one seeks recognition, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar? Aye. Mr. Coons?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal? Aye. Ms. Sorono? Aye. Mr. Booker?
Aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff?
Aye.
Mr. Welch?
Aye.
Ms. Butler?
Aye.
Mr. Graham?
Aye.
Mr. Grassley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn? No. Mr. Lee?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
Senator Cornyn, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe when Senator Cruz asked unanimous consent that a document be made part of the record, there was an opportunity for you to,
Without objection.
okay, thank you. Just want to make sure that was.
Senator Booker will close the debate on this now. Oh, I'm sorry, did you want to speak?
I'll be brief.
Sure.
I think it's clear that the objection to Mr. Mangi is not because of who he is, but what he's done. And his refusal to acknowledge the facts of his record. That's not the sort of candor that you would expect or that we deserve when it comes to exercising our advice and consent responsibilities under the Constitution. And I am really struck by the fact that here we are about 100 days after the worst terrorist attack against Israel in its history. I was just in Israel last week with members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Ossoff was there, among others. And I mean, this is like our 9/11. They're still traumatized, as you might imagine, by what happened to innocent men, women, and children, including the one-year-old hostage that I mentioned a moment ago that was featured in today's Wall Street Journal. So I think it's profoundly unfair to suggest that opposition to Mr. Mangi is because he's a Muslim. As Senator Cruz pointed out, we voted overwhelmingly to approve a judge who is a Muslim by an overwhelming vote as to the District Court in New Jersey. I just don't think you can square the argument that the objection to Mr. Mangi is because he's a Muslim, when in fact we overwhelmingly have confirmed a Muslim judge to the District Court in New Jersey. And I think it really, frankly, represents a new low for the committee to accuse a member of the committee for being somehow prejudiced against somebody because of their religion, when in fact it's clear that the objection is not to Mr. Mangi for who he is or his religious beliefs, but rather what he has done. And thank you for giving me the chance to say a few words.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley.
Mr. Chairman, I was not going to say anything because I asked quite a few questions of Mr. Mangi, and so I thought I had made my views clear. But I have to say, after you, a moment ago, not only read that letter to the record, which you're perfectly entitled to do, but before you did that, you said that those of us who had questioned Mr. Mangi on that day took this committee to a new low. Oh, yes, you did.
I didn't name names.
You didn't name names. You said those of us who questioned him took it to a new low.
Some did.
And that would be those of us on this side. And I did question him on that day, and frankly, I resent the insinuation that those of us who asked him questions are somehow anti-Muslim or prejudiced in some way. I think it's outrageous. I think it's absolutely outrageous. And frankly, as someone who has worked across the aisle on any number of pieces of legislation, you know, Mr. Mangi, supported by my friend Senator Booker, that is certainly a major point in his favor. And it's been a delight to work with Senator Booker on pieces of legislation in this committee and with you, Mr. Chairman. But I have to say, it's hard to do when you call us anti-Muslim racists, which is basically what you just did a moment ago. It's on video. Everybody can see it. I mean, truly, that is absolutely outrageous. And so I'll just reiterate again, my issue with Mr. Mangi is I don't care what his religion is or if he has a religion. I don't care. But I do care that he was the director of a center that was basically a mouthpiece for Hamas. And he said over and over, all his concerns were academic. My question is, did he not have concern about Jewish students? We've seen Jewish students barricaded in libraries after October 7th, barricaded in libraries, fearing for their lives. Did he not think that a center which actively promotes genocidal rhetoric might have some effect on the students he was supposed to be helping? I think that's a legitimate set of questions. Now, we could disagree on it. Clearly, we do. And I say again, I respect the support that he has from Senator Booker and others. That's fine. But I think in light of the events of October 7th, not just overseas, but in this country, and in light of what Jewish Americans have suffered in this country, in my own state, in the state of Missouri, in the city of St. Louis, we've had Jewish businesses spray painted with the worst sort of anti-Semitic slogans, graffiti, swastikas. We have Jewish students in our campuses in Missouri on the WashU campus say they feel unsafe. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask a gentleman who advised a center on campus that has spouted this kind of propaganda why he was associated with them. So I just take strong exception to that, Mr. Chairman, and I have to say, I wish you'd retract your remarks, because I think they were totally inappropriate.
I stand by the statement submitted to this committee by the ADL. The last person to speak will be Senator Booker.
Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chairman. I don't know where we're going to hit bottom, but I hope we're close. This hearing is designed to continue an attack on the court because you don't like their rulings. The effort to delegitimize the Roberts Court seems to be unending. The rhetoric around this has led to a man being arrested outside Justice Kavanaugh's home with guns and ties. A few days ago, there was an effort to stop a man who wanted to kill and torture 6 members of the court. Senator Schumer famously went to the court and threatened Justice Kavanaugh and Gorsuch before the Dobbs decision. So the American people, I hope you understand what's going on here. My Democratic colleagues want to destroy this court. And if they get in charge of the House, the Senate, and the White House, virtually all of them has said they will expand the court from 9 to 13, or whatever number they want to pick, to dilute the conservative majority that's been formed over decades. Why? Because they want the court to be another extension of their liberal agenda. For decades, Democrats have enjoyed a court that would rule in their favor when they couldn't win at the ballot box, and that's come to an end. So their response is to destroy this court. I promise you it will not go unanswered. The attack on this decision is incredibly, well, I like all my colleagues on this side, is just really off base. This is not uncharted territory. The Supreme Court in Nixon versus Fitzgerald said that former presidents are immune from civil liability for official conduct. Now, the question before the court, what status does the president have against criminal prosecutions? All of us, I think to a person, believe that what's going on against President Trump in New York and Georgia and other places is politically motivated legal garbage. That's what we think. We think Jack Smith's efforts are beyond the pale. They talk about insurrection, but he won't be charged with it. They've opened up Pandora's box. There'll be conservative prosecutors in states and counties probably taking up the challenge in the future, and that'll be bad for the presidency. What's going on here in America at this point in time, I think is bad for the presidency. Now, what did the court do? It issued a decision regarding the status of the president, and it said the following: absolute immunity for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority, such as pardons. When the Constitution confers an authority on the president specifically, they have absolute immunity. If that weren't the case, it would be chaos. Could you prosecute a president for a pardon that you didn't like? No, because that's the authority granted to the president by the Constitution. The Constitution makes the president the commander-in-chief. Presumptive immunity for other official acts. Now, these are official acts not specifically granted by the authorities granted by the Constitution. The Blassingame versus Trump case, 2 liberal judges and 1 conservative judges talked about this. Official acts extend to the outer perimeter of the president's official responsibility. It covers actions so long as they're not manifestly or palpably beyond his authority. Basically, the court adopted that reasoning. And the third is there's no immunity for unofficial acts. Now, that to me is a logical approach to how you would handle presidential immunity regarding criminal prosecution. When the Constitution gives the authority to the president specifically, they have absolute immunity. When they're acting officially, and that has to be a factual determination, I would suppose, there's a presumption that can be wiped away, and there's no immunity for unofficial acts. That to me seems to be a reasoned approach to a problem. Before the court ruled, it was established that back in the 80s, civil liability protections for the office of the president. Now we have before us issue of criminal liability of the president. All you want is an outcome. You could care less about the law. I've seen this firsthand in this committee with Kavanaugh. You just wanted to tear him down and keep that slot open. That's the problem with liberalism from my point of view, is that you just want an outcome. If you can't get what you want, then the people who said no must be bad for the country. They must be, bad people. You want the court to get you outcomes. You really don't care how they get there. And that's dangerous. And we're going to fight you on this. And we're going to win the majority. And we'll have hearings about a lot of things you won't talk about. And we'll do some good work together. We've worked on protecting children from online predators, and we'll continue all that. But if we get in charge of this place, I promise you this attack on the court is going to stop. It will be over. You will have lost the ability to try to take an independent branch of government and degrade it because you don't like the outcomes. Justice Roberts is probably the smartest person I've ever met in my life. I think he's motivated by an allegiance to the law. He has a conservative bent, that's for darn sure, but that's okay. It's okay to have a liberal bent, as long as you're faithful to the law. I think he is. Matter of fact, I think he's one of the most decent people to have ever held the office of Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. At his very core, he's a decent man. And what are you accusing him of? Basically, creating a monarchy in our country. That's just shameful. Sotomayor and Kagan, I voted for both. I thought they were qualified. I think their dissents here are beyond the pale. Just out there, kind of wacko stuff. Politically motivated dissents. But I respect them both. I just don't agree with them here. So the bottom line is, this hearing is not about righting a wrong. This hearing is about a continued narrative of delegitimizing a court you don't like. So we'll see how this holds up over time.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Now I'd like to turn to Senator Whitehouse, Chair of the Courts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also would like to thank our senators working with the White House to get these nominees through the committee. I appreciate that very much. Today, President Biden's going to the border. Former President Trump's going to the border. I think we all know why they're going to the border. The border is an absolute national security nightmare. Senator Cornyn's from Texas. He knows it probably better than anybody else, Senator Cruz. So just for a few minutes here, the bipartisan bill on the supplemental, the immigration bill, appreciate the effort, a lot of good things in it. We had one cloture vote, then we moved on to the aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. What's been missing, Mr. Chairman, is a committee-driven process to try to find common ground to see if we can move the ball forward on a broken immigration system. In 2008, I believe it was, 13, I can't remember, I've been so many of these bills, the Gang of Eight, whenever that was, we had markup in committee, dozens, probably hundreds of amendments, a couple of weeks on the floor. I voted for the product, so did you. I stand behind that product, but the point is, we had a chance for this committee to kind of lead the Senate on immigration. We produced a product and went to the floor and it was amended heavily. I would recommend we try to do that. The president's current and former president are going to the border for a reason. On May 15th, 2023, the House passed H.R. 2. It's been over here with no action for a very long time. So I would urge you, Mr. Chairman, to take that bill or the Senate bipartisan bill or any bill you'd like, bring it to the committee and let's have a debate within the committee to see if we can pass something on immigration and send it to the floor and allow our colleagues to have a say so that we can kind of go back to the normal way of doing business in terms of trying to fix an immigration problem. And maybe the best example lately of why we need to do something is the death of Miss Laken Riley, beautiful young lady at the University of Georgia who was killed jogging, and everyone is presumed innocent in this country until proven otherwise, but the person being charged with her horrible death came to this country illegally and was paroled. Now, again, that person's entitled to a fair trial. We'll see what the system in Georgia does, but we do know this. We do know the person who's been charged with that crime came over in 2022 illegally at the border and received parole. What I want is an analysis of his case. Here's the law. The DHS Secretary may, on a temporary basis, as conditions may warrant, on a case-by-case basis, parole people in the United States based on two factors: urgent humanitarian reason, significant public benefit. So the gentleman that was charged with his murder, he was paroled. Secretary Mayorkas told me at an appropriations hearing, if I have his testimony, I'll enter it in the record, ask him, when somebody's paroled, is there an individual analysis required by law performed on each case? And he said yes. So what I want, and I hope the committee will back me up here, is an analysis in this case. What were the factors that led to him being paroled? Is there a written record? Is there an analysis that we can look at? I think you owe it, quite frankly, to the country. I wrote a letter to DHS that I will submit to the record. I'm expecting an answer. I think the family of Ms. Riley certainly deserves an answer. I think everybody in the country certainly deserves an answer. So our parole system was addressed in the bipartisan bill, but not in a way that was sufficient in my view. I, along with others, tried to make sure that DHS granted parole on a case-by-case basis with an individual analysis. Here's where we stand on parole in the Biden administration. $795,000 people paroled in FY22, 802,764 paroled in FY23. In calendar year 23, I think it was 997,000 people. How does that compare with past presidents? During the Obama-Trump presidency, the average number of people paroled into the United States per year was 5,623. The average for President Biden is 795,561. What's going on here? The law is being ignored, is being abused. The bipartisan bill did not address this. There needs to be a mandate from Congress reinforcing to DHS, stop blanket parole of people from Venezuela, Cuba, and other countries. You're violating the law. There's a court case in Texas about this. So I will introduce into the record my letter to Secretary Mayorkas asking him about the information regarding the person charged with Ms. Riley's death. What were the factors considered to grant him parole in 2022? And I would urge this committee, after the visit by President Trump and Biden, current and former president, to take up some legislation as a base bill. It can be anything you would like, and see if the committee can find some common ground, report it to the floor of the Senate, and try to do something if we can. So, Mr. Chairman, the country is really in a crisis. There's enough fentanyl come across our border last year to kill everybody in the country. In the last 3 years, there have been enough fentanyl to come across our southern border to kill 5 billion people. There's been over 200 people come across the border on the terrorist watch list. The carnage related to a broken border is unbelievable. The leading cause of death of young people in this country is fentanyl poisoning coming across a broken southern border, mostly manufactured in China. I don't know how many people have to die. I don't know how much longer this has to go before we engage in a process that can get a result. I appreciate the bipartisan negotiations. It took months. It was done behind closed doors. It's now time to have an open debate about how to fix a broken immigration system to try to save some lives if we can, and show the country that we can work together to fix a problem that I think deserves a solution. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I hope you will join me in insisting that DHS, Secretary Mayorkas, provide us information about why and how this individual was paroled. Thank you.
Let me say at the outset that in terms of this horrible case involving the person who was killed, we will, of course, make available to every member of the committee access to that information that helps them understand the case. We have to draw the line short of interfering in the prosecution of this case, and I'm sure the senator from South Carolina agrees with that. Let me also say that the senator from South Carolina made it crystal clear months ago, that there would be no defense supplemental bill without addressing border security. He was adamant in his request, and his request was certainly timely. The situation at the border demands a response from Washington and Congress. And as a result of his position, making it known here on Capitol Hill and across the country, there was established a bipartisan group to write a bill on border security. The Republicans insisted, and rightly so, that they wanted their own spokesman on that group, James Lankford of Oklahoma. I know James Lankford personally. I think all of us do, and respect him. He is a principled individual. We may disagree on issues politically, but I do believe he is an honest man and would be an honest broker in this process. Kirsten Sinema joined in that, as well as Senator Murphy from Connecticut. And they put in not only hours, but days and weeks, perhaps months of effort to come up with a border security bill, and they did. I didn't like some provisions of it, but I understood that in this world we live in, compromise is an essential element to success. And we may have a majority in the Senate here, nominal majority. We still face a filibuster threat, even with that nominal majority. And so the border security bill was offered for the Senate to consider, a bipartisan approach, which I believe would have made positive strides towards dealing with many of the issues that the senator from South Carolina has just raised. We know what happened next. Donald Trump announced that he didn't want this bill to go forward. He went on to say, and explicitly quoted, said, "Blame it on me if the bill fails. I'm going to blame it on him." The decision not to even negotiate a bipartisan bill, but to stop cold in its tracks, is an edict from former president, which some people think very highly of. I don't. I think that bipartisanship, compromise, and attempt to make some progress is part of why we're here. So at this point, the senator from South Carolina says, let's have a hearing and a markup in this committee. Is Donald Trump going to rule that markup too and decide what comes out, if anything? I don't know the answer to that. But why in the world would we walk away from this bipartisan border security bill that has a chance of passage? Why isn't that the standard that we move on in terms of dealing with this unsustainable situation at the border? I'm willing to endorse that effort publicly, as I have before, because I think it's the right starting point. I respect James Lankford, I hope we all do, for the effort that he put into this on behalf of the Republican side. So we have more to say, I'm sure, in the days ahead about the border security situation.
I know, Senator Leaf, if I could just have a second here to respond. I want to get on with the markup, but this is important in this regard. Senator Durban, we have worked together to produce products that pass the Senate, fail. I know how frustrating that is. The bipartisan bill had many good things. I want to compliment Senator Lankford and Sinema and Murphy. I was actually part of the group trying to find a way to put something together. I never envisioned that we would have one cloture vote and move on to the defense supplemental. It was clear to me sort of the fix was in from a leadership point of view. The parole provisions in that bill were insufficient to deal with the problem we have. And here's the sad thing. The problem is self-inflicted. President Biden could stop all this by just following the law. And he's chosen not to. Most of the things we need to fix in the short term were self-inflicted. Remain in Mexico was a policy that you had to wait in Mexico until your asylum hearing that could be 4 or 5 years away. Well, people didn't pay. They stopped paying thousands of dollars to sit in Mexico for 4 or 5 years. I went to the border like 2 weeks ago with Senator Scott. If you go, and I recommend you go, I think we should all go to Ukraine. I think we should all go to the border. The Border Patrol will tell you, and I'm sure Senator Cornyn will echo this, that two things could be done really quickly. Basically, deport some people so people will stop coming if they see people leaving, and go back to remain in Mexico. That would stop 70% literally overnight. Those two things can be done without any law being passed. As to trying to find a solution, I didn't think one cloture vote would be the end of the debate. It certainly wasn't in the past. As to President Trump, he believes we can wait. I don't. I'll gladly have him mark up here. I think we need to do something as soon as we can, but we got to actually address the core issues here. And I was told by Senator Lankford, when it comes to doing away with blanket parole, that's a non-starter. 30,000 people a month to parole from 4 countries under the current system without any individual basis. I'd like to have a chance to do something about that problem. If you don't, you're not going to fix the problem. So I'll end where I began. Let's use the committee like we've done in the past. Let's try something new and different. As to whether President Trump would support the product, I don't know. But I know this, the committee's a pretty capable group. If we can find some common ground here among this crowd, then I think you got something to work with.
So, Senator, I'm more than happy to enter myself. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a great affinity for Tennessee because that's where a lot of my family lives. I went to high school in North Carolina, tried to get it admitted to the Union as North Carolina, but we had to cede that territory. So I got a big connection to Tennessee. And I just want everybody to recognize why we're having this discussion right now, because we nuked the blue slip on circuit judges. And now we've got two Republican members who absolutely do not like this nominee. I'm not even going to get into the argument. I'm sympathetic to a lot of what Senator Blackburn said, but we are here because we have politicized circuit court nominations. And I don't believe the White House has treated Senator Blackburn and Senator Hagerty with the respect they deserve. Of course we have a Democrat president. Of course we just should assume it's going to be a Democrat nominee. But honestly, is this the only one the White House can come up with? And the reason why I'm a little bit sympathetic to it is I had the White House try to tell me they were going to jam me on a circuit court nominee for the Fourth Circuit. They made the mistake of being definitive about how they were going to dictate the process until I told them I walked across the aisle and I got Democrats to commit to me that they would not confirm their nominee, that they were going to try to shove down my throat. I've tried to keep that private. But I'm trying to explain to my colleagues, folks, if you want to work on a bipartisan basis, do it when it's hard. Go back and if you want to be bipartisan, do it when it's hard. Go back to the White House and say, how on earth can you have two members from Tennessee objecting to this? Now, this member is going to get out of this committee. Next year, we may have a different president, and we may have a president who's not currently in office, and that president may choose to shove down the throats members in your circuits later on. Remember this moment. You can still get angry, but remember at this moment in time when you cast this vote, you're guilty of the same behavior you're going to accuse some of these folks being guilty of a year from now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to my more senior senator.
I was just going to speak from the seat on this committee occupied by Senator Feinstein, because as I sit in this chair, I remember her sitting here and describing her fury that not only was a circuit judge being shoved down her throat because of the lack of a blue slip rule, but she didn't even believe that the nominee was from California. So this problem goes back to a determination made by Republicans that blue slips would not be honored for circuit nominees. I'm more than happy to consider trying to undo that and figure out a way to go forward, but a lot of us got burned hard by that rules change and the disrespect to us on this side as senators that was shown in the aftermath of that rules change.
Sir, White House, I agree, but can we all agree that that fuse got lit when Senator Reid nuked the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees?
No, I think the blue slip is a completely different thing.
Oh, okay.
Senator Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand and actually feel the anger and the fury of Senator Tillis, and I think it's justified, and I hear Senator Blackburn, and I don't need to hearken to a member, God rest her soul. This happened to me under the Trump administration. A Third Circuit judge was shoved down our throat that we didn't even have a chance to meet with or engage with, and we thought we were negotiating in good faith for a large picture that included district court judges, but then we were told that our opinions didn't matter. And so I'm not looking at the providence of how we got here. This is situations where people feel justified injuries on both sides. I just suggest to members who feel the same passion as I do, and as I think Senator Tillis does, that we could sit here and curse the darkness or point fingers at who caused it. But I'm happy to meet with anybody that wants to try to figure out a way out of this mess, because I think what my colleagues are pointing out on the other side of the dais is absolutely right. This is wrong, and I believe we should get back to where we were before.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to echo my concerns to those who have spoken already with regard to their concerns with this judge. I want to raise a related matter, a matter that came up at his confirmation hearing that I asked him about in the hearing and didn't really get satisfactory answers, so I asked him more specifically and more clearly, I thought, and the questions considered for the record. One of those questions, question 37, I asked him the following. Knowing that Ms. Taylor Fondren had been accused of intentionally withholding exculpatory evidence from the defendant and making false representations to the court, did you have any conversation with her about those allegations? Were the two separate investigations into her conduct a factor in your decision to elevate her to serve as your first assistant? Remember, when someone serves as a U.S. attorney, the single most important and impactful hiring decision that person must make is to decide who's going to be the first assistant. The first assistant steps in the absence of a U.S. attorney and really does a substantial job in running the office. So it would not be an insignificant thing to appoint someone who had multiple complaints of violating Brady, withholding exculpatory evidence from counsel to the defense during a criminal trial. It would be an unusual thing to put in a first assistant who would have multiple complaints unresolved over that and not at least talk about it. His response was, as far as I can tell, utterly information-free. It contained words. The words referred sort of to the subject matter at hand, but were in no way, shape, or form responsive to my question. Instead, he says, Ms. Fondren is a native of Memphis who has worked in public service with the U.S. Department of Justice for her entire career. She began her career as Presidential Management Fellow with the Drug Enforcement Administration. It goes on, most of it's travelogue. Fast forward toward the end, and the next paragraph. At the time, I appointed Ms. Fondren to be the first Assistant U.S. Attorney in October 2022. I understood that the matter that ultimately led to the 2023 D.C. Court of Appeals decision in her case was still being litigated. It's not responsive to the question either. In response to questions I asked, including questions similar to those that Senator Blackburn discussed a moment ago, and those that those other questions that I asked related to Q for number 37 in my list of questions submitted to him, I found him to be, at best, non-cooperative as a witness. I also found some of his answers to be not entirely forthcoming, or at least responsive to what we were asking. That is concerning to me, in addition to all the other reasons that have been stated. I intend to vote no.
Thank you, Senator Lee. I just want the members to realize one or two things. One is I have worked with Senator Graham in a bipartisan way to preserve the blue slip for district court judges. There's been pressure on me and others to change that. Some from friends and some from those who are not friends. But I still believe it is a valuable tool for the appointment of district court judges. And I thank the Republicans on this side, particularly, and others in the chamber for working on a bipartisan basis to make the blue slip work under a president of a different political party. If we are going to do anything and blue slips on circuit court judges, I think there's one premise. We should do it prospectively, not knowing the outcome of an election that may change the presidency and may not. That is a fair way to approach it. If there's any member of the committee who wants to start an active conversation along those lines, I'd be glad to join it.
Mr. Chair, I want to be clear. I thank you for that, because I think you have been good on that. The only point is, folks, this is an opportunity to say the White House needs to do its homework. You don't have to have Senator Blackburn and Senator Hagerty having rave reviews over it, but you could argue that the level of their emotion right now justifies another look at this nominee. And I just apologize in advance, colleagues, next year, if we're in the majority and there is a Republican in the White House after you are so frustrated with a circuit nomination that you're almost likely going to have confirmed. Remember this moment. Being bipartisan when it's hard is what I'm looking for. Not judging this individual, but missing this opportunity right now. And I want to be technically correct that Senator Reid started something that Leader McConnell finished on judicial nominations. We all know that, but they're intrinsically linked. This is a moment for next year, if the tables are turned, to remind me, Tom, you remember when I voted against a nominee because this member was not treated with respect on judiciary? Then you can count me in to vote against the circuit nominee if you're treated the same way. But if you go down this path and you say, well, let's get together and sort it out, no, it's not about that. It's about a decision you're about to make. And if you make this decision, somebody who's tried to develop a reputation for working you all and voting on about as many nominees out of here as Lindsey Graham, maybe even more, including a district judge last week for the state of Illinois, just remember this moment. Because you won't be able to have the moral high ground to stand on to say, I should support opposing that nominee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator from Texas.
Madam President, there are times when the eyes of history are upon the United States Senate. This is one of those times. We are facing today an existential crisis at our southern border. It is qualitatively different than anything we have ever faced at our southern border in the history of our nation. A few moments ago, the senator from Illinois acknowledged the border was broken. Although he acknowledged it in a classic Washington way of using the passive voice, the border is broken, that is designed to hide and obscure who broke the border. He is correct that the border is broken, but it was broken deliberately by the President of the United States, Joe Biden, by the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, by the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, and by every single Senate Democrat who repeatedly have rubber-stamped and embraced this open border policy. The senator from Illinois said the border is broken. He is also the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, on which I serve, on which Senator Lee serves, on which Senator Kennedy serves. In the past 3 years, we have held precisely 0 hearings on the crisis on our southern border. The Senate Judiciary Committee cannot be bothered to inquire as to the cause of this crisis. Understand why Alejandro Mayorkas became the second cabinet secretary in the history of the United States to be impeached. The last one was in 1876, the Secretary of War. And now, 148 years later, Alejandro Mayorkas joins him. It is not because Alejandro Mayorkas is incompetent. It is not because he's negligent. It's not because he's bad at his job. Rather, unfortunately, Alejandro Mayorkas is very, very good at his job. However, he does not view his job as securing the border. He does not view his job as protecting our homeland security. Rather, he views his job as openly and directly violating, flouting federal law and aiding and abetting the criminal invasion of this United States. He is not trying to secure the border. He is trying to accelerate the invasion that is happening. He wants more illegal aliens and more criminal illegal aliens released into this country. Under the Biden administration, 10.4 million illegal immigrants have been released into this country. And Senate Democrats are desperate to avoid the misery and suffering and death that their radical policies have produced. In a hearing before the Judiciary Committee, I asked Secretary Mayorkas how many migrants died last year crossing illegally into this country. He said, I don't know, I have no idea. I said, of course you don't. The number's 853. That's a number from your own department, but you don't care about the dead bodies that Texas farmers and ranchers are finding nearly 3 a day. When I brought 19 senators down to the border to see firsthand what was happening, we went out on a boat on the Rio Grande River. We saw a man floating dead in the river who had drowned that day. By the way, those 19 senators were only Republicans. I've invited my Democrat colleagues, I've invited the senator from Illinois, come to the southern border and see the people that are dying because of the policies you support. None of them have any interest in seeing firsthand the deaths they are producing. Madam President, I've looked in the eyes of children, of little boys and little girls who've been brutalized by human traffickers day after day after day. None of the Senate Democrats want to take responsibility for the little girls and little boys to whom unspeakable evils are being done. Madam President, I've looked in the eyes of women who've been repeatedly and violently raped by human traffickers. None of the Senate Democrats want to take responsibility for the horrific violence and suffering their open border policies have produced. Madam President, when I asked Secretary Mayorkas about colored wristbands on a poster I displayed at the Senate Judiciary Committee, he responded by saying he had no idea what those wristbands are. Madam President, those colored wristbands are worn by just about every illegal alien coming to this country. The colors correspond to how many thousands of dollars they owe the cartels. Understand, the cartels don't view them as human beings. They don't even view them as livestock. They are cargo. And the colors show how many thousands of dollars they owe. If you stand on the banks of the Rio Grande River, you will see hundreds or even thousands of those colored wristbands laying there in the grass. And what Alejandro Mayorkas was saying, as I told him, I said, Mr. Secretary, you just told the American people you're utterly incompetent at your job and you don't even give a damn enough to pretend to try. When I invited my Democrat colleagues, come to the border and see the wristbands, the Democrats don't take us up on it. And understand why those wristbands matter. Thousands upon thousands of teenage boys, they turn themselves into the Biden administration. They say, where do you want to go? Some will say Chicago, some will say New York, some will say Los Angeles. And the Biden administration puts them on an airplane, puts them on a bus, and sends them to every city in America. The mayor of Chicago, the hometown of the senator from Illinois, has declared it a crisis, the illegal aliens pouring into his city. And yet, Senate Democrats not only will do nothing about it, they continue the policies in place that make it worse and worse and worse. And understand, those teenage boys, when they arrive in Chicago or L.A. or New York, and by the way, the Democrat mayor of L.A. has also said it's a crisis. The Democrat mayor of New York has said it's a crisis. The Democrat mayor of Boston has said it's a crisis. The Democrat mayor of Washington, D.C. has said it's a crisis. When they arrive, they owe the cartels thousands of dollars. If they don't pay the money back, the cartels will murder their families. And so they are working for the cartels. There are crimes going on in your home state of California today by illegal immigrants the Biden administration has released that are working for the cartels. There are Californians who are being robbed right now, who are being carjacked, who are being assaulted. There are people in Chicago who are being robbed, who are being assaulted. You want to understand the misery? Take a look at Laken Riley. There's been a lot of discussion about Laken Riley, although sadly, only on one side of this chamber. If a Democrat senator has said the words Laken Riley, I have not heard it come from their mouths. Laken Riley was a beautiful 22-year-old woman who was murdered because of the Democrats' open border policies. How can I say that with such certainty? Because her murderer, an illegal immigrant from Venezuela, was apprehended in El Paso. We had him. We had him. He was arrested. And all Joe Biden, all Alejandro Mayorkas had to do was follow the law. And we would have put the murderer on a plane and flew him back to Venezuela, and he never would have been in Georgia murdering Laken Riley. But Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas made the decision that politics matters more than protecting American citizens, and so they released this violent criminal. He went from El Paso to New York City, where he was arrested again. We had him a second time, this time for endangering the safety of a child. Unfortunately, New York City is a sanctuary city run by Democrat politicians, so what did they do? They let him go a second time. And he went down to Georgia, and Laken Riley, 22 years old, was out jogging, a nursing student. She's out jogging like millions of people do across America. And this murderer took a brick and beat her to death. If either Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas had followed the law, or if New York had kept him in jail, she would still be alive. You know what I also haven't heard from Senate Democrats? The name Jeremy Caceres. Jeremy Caceres is a beautiful 2-year-old boy, murdered in Prince George's County, Maryland, just miles from where we are right now. Murdered by an illegal alien that Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas released just a few weeks ago. News broke of an illegal alien from Haiti that not only did Biden release, but flew from Haiti to the United States. The Biden administration has had over 300,000 secret flights bringing illegal aliens to America. In this case, they brought the Haitian illegal immigrant to Boston, Massachusetts. And what happened just a couple of weeks ago? He was arrested for violently raping a 15-year-old girl who is seriously disabled. These are the very real consequences of the Democrats' open border policies. And yet Democrat senators don't want to confront the people who are dying, who are suffering because of them. Alejandro Mayorkas was not impeached because he's negligent. He's impeached because he's actively defying the law. By the way, he's turned the Mexican drug cartels into deca-billionaires, according to the New York Times in 2018. The revenue from human trafficking the cartels earned was roughly $500 million. Last year, it was $13 billion. Thanks to Joe Biden and Senate Democrats, the drug cartel's profits have gone up 2,600%. That's why the House has impeached Alejandro Mayorkas. Now, what is the Senate to do when impeachment occurs? Well, fortunately, we have a document that tells us what to do. It's called the Constitution of the United States. Under the Constitution, it is the sole power of the House to impeach and the sole power and responsibility of the Senate to try. 21 times in our nation's history, more than 200 years, the House has impeached an individual and sent articles of impeachment over to the Senate. Here's what's happened in those 21 times. In one time, the Senate concluded it had no jurisdiction because the individual impeached was a senator. And impeachment only attaches to members of the executive branch or the judicial branch. So they dismissed that one for lack of jurisdiction. In 3 of them, the individuals impeached was no longer in office. And so the Senate didn't act because it was moot. It was no longer necessary to resolve because the individual impeached was out of office. In the remaining 17 times, all of them, 100% of the time, the Senate conducted a trial, the Senate heard evidence, and the Senate adjudicated guilt or innocence. Each senator stood up and said guilty or not guilty. Well, next week when the articles arrive, we are told that Senator Schumer intends not to proceed to a trial, not to follow the Senate rules of impeachment, not to allow any evidence, but simply to move to table, to throw it out at the outset. Why is Senator Schumer doing so? 3 reasons. Number 1, he desperately wants to stop the House managers from presenting their evidence. Senator from Illinois says he knows there's no evidence. It's like an ostrich putting his head in the sand. One way to know there's no evidence is look at no evidence, hear no evidence, consider no evidence, and do everything you can to prevent the American people from hearing evidence. Number 2, the Senate Democrats want to stop a trial. They don't want the American people to know the suffering and misery and dead bodies their policies are producing. But number 3, the Senate Democrats desperately want to prevent Democrats who are on the ballot right now from casting a vote, guilty or not guilty. They want to avoid an adjudication. Because you know what? Senate Democrats are back in their home state saying, gosh, I'm really concerned about illegal immigration. If they were really concerned, we can decide that next week by voting to fulfill our constitutional obligation to hold a trial. Now, let me say something. I look and see the senator from Illinois. I see the senator from West Virginia. All three of us were on the Senate floor at another momentous time in 2013, when then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid exercised the nuclear option and blew up the filibuster for nominations. That did enormous damage to the institution of the Senate. I remember standing in the well of the Senate, 10 feet from where I am now, and turning to Senator Amy Klobuchar that day. And I told her, I said, you are going to regret this day. This is a catastrophic mistake. And I told her then, the result of this decision from Harry Reid and the Democrats will be more justices and judges on the court in the mold of Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas. Madam President, if you want to know why Roe versus Wade has been overturned, it is because Harry Reid and the Democrats exercised the nuclear option in 2013. Had they not done so, there's no way this Senate would have confirmed all three of the nominees put forward. It was the direct consequence of the utter disregard for this institution Senate Democrats have. Now, I bring that up because we are at a second moment that is equally consequential. Except instead of nuking the Senate rules as they did in 2013, Senate Democrats are preparing to nuke the Constitution of the United States itself, the impeachment clause, which every single time that the Senate has had jurisdiction and the person has been in office, the Senate has held a trial. If Senate Democrats proceed next week to table that, they will blow up that precedent, and I'm here to make a prediction. Senate Democrats sometimes behave like small children with no ability to look to the future and anticipate the consequences of their actions. Everyone can recognize right now we've got a presidential election coming up in November. None of us knows the outcome. I'm going to posit to you right now there is a significant chance Donald Trump will be reelected as president. I'm also going to posit to you that's an outcome no one on the Democrat side wants to see happen. There is also a significant chance Republicans will retake the Senate. But there is a possibility that Democrats will retake the House. That is a very likely scenario in this election. If that happens, I turn to my friend from West Virginia because I want you to contemplate what will happen. If that happens, I'm going to make a prediction. 1 year from today, we're going to be on this Senate floor. And if Democrats control the House, they will have impeached Donald Trump again. Impeached him a third time and maybe a fourth time and maybe a fifth time. If they have the House, that's what they're going to do. And if and when those impeachment articles come over to the Senate, if Senate Democrats next week dismiss this impeachment, I'm telling you right now, Senate Republicans will do the same thing to any impeachment that comes over from the House. And what Senate Democrats will have done is effectively eliminated the Senate's power of impeachment anytime the Senate is the same party as the president. Madam President, many of us were here the last time this scenario happened. It was the first Trump impeachment. The first Trump impeachment, you had a Democratic House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican president. The Democrats in the House impeached Donald Trump. They sent articles of impeachment over. The Senate Republicans could have played these games and tried to table the impeachment, said, we're going to shirk our constitutional duty. We're not going to have a trial, but we didn't. We followed the Constitution. My question for my colleagues here is there even one Democrat who cares about the institution of the Senate, who cares about the Constitution, who cares about democracy? Democrats love to pound their chest and say they are defending democracy while they are engaging in a relentless assault on democracy. I have an organizing resolution that would follow the precedent and simply appoint an impeachment committee to hear the trial. So the trial doesn't have to be on the Senate floor. That's typically done for presidents. Instead, the impeachment committee could hear the evidence, which is what the Senate has done over and over and over again. By the way, every Democrat who says we've got other things to focus on, FISA and other matters, the impeachment committee would proceed parallel with the Senate floor considering other business. So it would delay nothing on the Senate floor to follow our Constitution and have an impeachment committee, but it would avoid destroying the impeachment power of the Senate destroying the Constitution, and it would also give the American people a chance to hear the evidence and to hear the presentation of the House managers. Therefore, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Rules and Administration be discharged from further consideration, and the Senate now proceed to S-Res 622. Further, that the resolution be agreed to, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Majority Whip.
Madam President, the date was June the 27th, 2013, and on the floor of the United States Senate, we had done something that no one believed could be achieved. We had, through the Gang of Eight, established a comprehensive immigration reform bill. I was part of that Gang of eight senators, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, who labored for months to create that legislation. It was comprehensive, as I noted, covered every aspect from border all the way through the immigration process. We brought it to the floor in the hopes that for the first time in decades, we would finally reach an agreement, a bipartisan agreement. The people who were involved in it, John McCain on the Republican side, Senator Flake from Arizona, Senator Graham from South Carolina, and four Democrats worked hard to bring this to the floor. It was an opportunity for us to finally do something together. It got 68 votes. We needed 60, but we got 68 votes. There was a lot of celebration because business and labor and others were supporting us, and I'm so happy that we got it done. We know what happened to that bill. It went over and died in the House of Representatives. The Republican leadership over there refused to even call it for consideration. Of the Republican senators currently on the floor, 2 of them were on the floor on June the 27th, 2013. They both voted no. Listen to the speeches and ask yourself the question, if the border and immigration policy need to be fixed in America, why weren't you there when we had a chance for a bipartisan approach to comprehensive immigration reform? And to make it even worse, there was an argument made that we would not provide defense supplemental spending asked for by the administration around the world unless we came up with a border reform bill within the last several months. And the Republicans said, we have a leader on our side of the aisle that we want to head up our effort to come up with a bipartisan bill to deal with the border. We do believe it needs to be fixed. It is in crisis. They proffered James Lankford, a conservative Republican senator from Oklahoma, a highly respected senator. I may disagree with him on many issues, but I respect him as a member of the Senate. He was to be their lead negotiator, and we respected that request. The Democrats had Chris Murphy and Kirsten Sinema joining in the effort and brought to the floor, or prepared to bring to the floor, a measure that was a bipartisan approach to solve this problem. Why is that necessary? Because in this body you need 60 votes. If you don't have 60 votes, you're wasting your time. We needed something bipartisan. And so this measure was headed to the floor, and at the last minute, former President Donald Trump announced that he wanted to stop the process. He did not want to even attempt to solve the problem with bipartisan legislation. He said, you can blame me if you want to, and I blame him again. Yes, he did that. And unfortunately, the Republican senators were complicit, most of them, in that effort instead of respecting what James Lankford had achieved and what a bipartisan bill would have made. So you can say what you want, you can make all the speeches about bodies and suffering, and I'm sure that some of that's true. But the bottom line is when you had a chance to do something about it with the bipartisan Gang of Eight bill, you voted no. And when you had a chance to support James Lankford's bipartisan approach to fixing the border, you were not there to be seen. You were loyal to Donald Trump and not loyal to the situation that we face in the Senate. I object.
Madam President.
Objection is heard. Senator from Texas.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that I have 2 minutes to respond. Senator Durbin.
Without objection.
Madam President, nowhere in Senator Durbin's remarks did we hear any mention of the children being brutalized by traffickers. Nowhere did we hear of the women trapped in sex slavery. Nowhere did we hear the words Laken Riley. Nowhere did we hear Jeremy Caceres. Nowhere did we hear a word about the dead bodies, 3 a day nearly, that are being found on Texas properties. Nowhere did we hear a word about the suffering. Instead, what did he do? He pointed to the Democrats' longstanding objection to grant amnesty to as many people as possible so they get more Democrat voters. The Gang of Eight bill was a terrible bill, and Senator Durbin is unhappy that democracy operated and the House of Representatives made the decision not to pass it. That's the way our system works. That's what led Senate Democrats and Joe Biden to decide to just open the border lawlessly because they couldn't actually get the votes to pass their bill. The Schumer bill he's talking about would have made this situation worse. And understand what Senator Durbin is saying. It is the policy of Senate Democrats to support these open borders. They don't have any arguments on the merits. And by the way, Joe Biden inherited the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. All he had to do was nothing because we had success in securing the border. And Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas deliberately broke the border. And they continue the policies in place that ensure tomorrow more children are going to be brutalized, more women are going to be raped. They know that, and they're not willing to do anything to stop it. That is, I believe, immoral and wrong, and the Senate should hold a trial as the Constitution requires. We owe that to the American people.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Aye. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler. Aye. Mr. Graham.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
Yes.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No.
Mr. Hawley. No. Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Yes, by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn. No. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 16, the nays are 5.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Adil Mangi, nominated to the Third Circuit. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on his nomination?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz, Senator Cruz, I'll take you first, and then Senator Lee and Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have deep concerns about this nominee, and I would note we have talked at length in this committee about the nature of Joe Biden's judicial nominees. He is consistently seeking people who are extreme, who are partisans, and who are out of the mainstream. Today, we are voting on several judges whose records, quite frankly, are extraordinary. And it is consistently disappointing that no matter what a judge has done, a judicial nominee has done, no matter how extreme their record, the Democrats on this committee will vote in favor of those nominees. Mr. Mangi served for years on the Board of Advisors of a radical and anti-Semitic law center at Rutgers. It was called the Center for Security, Race, and Rights. That center hosted an event on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, challenging the, quote, narrative regarding that gruesome terror attack. The existing narrative concerning 9/11, to the extent that there is one, is that vicious terrorists launched a cowardly attack and killed thousands of American civilians. Call me crazy, I don't think that's a narrative that needs to be rethought. It's pretty accurate in terms of what happened, but apparently the center did not think so. The panel of speakers at the event included, firstly, an actual terrorist. I'm not joking. Sami al-Aryan, who in 2006 was convicted of conspiracy to contribute services or benefits to a terrorist organization, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, spoke on this 9/11 panel. The panel also featured Hatem Bazian, who explicitly called for intifada in the United States. That's not rumor or innuendo, it's on video, and it's undisputed. Is that a mainstream position? Apparently Senate Democrats think it is. To have another October 7th here in the United States. Are my Democratic colleagues okay with this? Or do they simply believe the press will not report anything, no matter how extreme these nominees are, so they can be safe? This event also featured Professor Rabab Abdul Hadi, who had hosted her own events in San Francisco, ones that platformed and featured an actual terrorist and plane hijacker, Leila Khaled. Mr. Mangi, who was on the advisory board of this center, while all of this was transpiring. Now, if this were just a single isolated event, maybe it would be a different story. But instead, the opposite is true. This sort of radical political programming was at the very core of this organization Mr. Mangi was involved in. In May of 2021, the center held an event called, quote, the 100 Years War on Palestine Teach-In, a Jewish news syndicate opinion piece entitled, quote, Hamas apologists slander Israel at Rutgers Teach-In, described the event as, quote, terrorist whitewashing webinar. Among other things, speakers at the event explained that, quote, Israel has succeeded in painting Palestinian resistance as terror. Understand the Democrat senators on this committee are perfectly fine with that. They don't have a problem with that at all because they're getting ready to vote for a judge who served on the advisory board and saw event after event after event and didn't see anything he disagreed with because he kept serving there. On September 2022, the center held another event entitled, quote, Consistent Partiality, U.S. Foreign Policy on Palestine, Israel. One of the speakers, Peter Beinart, stated, quote, there's a deep identification among many conservative white American Christians with Israel, and it partly comes from the fact that Israel, like the United States, is a settler colonial state. The Democrats on this committee agree with that? Apparently, they're willing to vote for judges that do. On May 29th, 2021, the director of the center, Professor Sahar Aziz, signed a letter which was posted on the center's website, which read, quote, a ceasefire does not end the colonial conditions of structural violence and inequality that Palestinians live under. The letter went on, quote, the Palestinian rights to freedom, security in their homes, to return, self-determination, and to be free of violent occupation are well established under international law. The language of both-sidedness, of timeless or religious conflict with moments of escalation erases the military, economic, media, and diplomatic power that Israel, an occupying force, has over Palestine. The most shocking part of this statement reads, quote, we are in awe of the Palestinian struggle to resist violent occupation, removal, and erasure, and the expansion of Israeli settler colonialism. Well, after October 7th, are Senate Democrats in awe of that? We'll find out with their vote in a moment. I asked Mr. Mangi, did he agree with these statements? Specifically, did he agree or disagree with Professor Aziz? And I have to say his answer was reminiscent of Sergeant Schultz in Hogan's Heroes. I know nothing. Who's she again? I asked him, did he agree with Professor Aziz's statement, whether Israel was an occupying force in Palestine? And he refused to answer. He said, it was too complex. Let that sink in for a minute. I have to say, I kind of wondered if he was auditioning to be president of Harvard. He just needs context to know whether the Hamas terrorist or the IDF are more problematic. He had the opportunity to denounce this event, to denounce these statements, to denounce this center, and he didn't do it. He just said, no, I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. No, too complex. So I have no idea. I have no views at all. He also tried to give this committee the impression that his connection with the center was extremely limited. What center? No, I was just on an advisory board. I have no idea what they're doing. Mind you, look, it's possible, I don't know, but it's possible he didn't know about this event celebrating terrorists on 9/11. It's possible he didn't know about the event before it happened, but you know what he didn't do? He didn't resign after it happened. He didn't say, whoa, I didn't know this is what you guys were doing. Nope, he was perfectly fine. And by the way, they kept on doing these events over and over and over again. But he wasn't just on the advisory board. He was a donor. He gave $6,500 of his own money, wrote it to the center. But that's not it. He didn't just give his own money. He also went to his law firm, Patterson Belknap, to help get the center an additional $13,000. So nearly 20 grand. And mind you, what Mr. Mangi wants to tell this committee is, yeah, I helped raise nearly 20 grand. I gave 6,500 myself. I was on the advisory board, but you can't blame me for anything. And mind you, he could have done what some of Biden's nominees do, which is take their record and run away from it, denounce it, say I was mistaken, I was young. No, he didn't say any of that. Instead, he just said it's too complex, he can't give an opinion. He didn't denounce any of this. And by the way, who recruited Mr. Mangi to the center? That would be the director, Sahar Aziz, the same woman who described Israel as an occupying force, quote unquote, that engages in, quote, settler colonialism. The Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey has stated that Aziz, quote, regularly and consistently promoted vile anti-Semitic propaganda. The Senate Democrats agree with that. Quote, vile anti-Semitic propaganda? Well, we're going to find out, and there's no surprise. Senate Democrats of the Russian Politburo. That's how you vote, no matter how extreme the nominee. I understand when your party's in power, it's expected that you vote for most of your president's judicial nominees. Many of us on the committee were here all 4 years Donald Trump was president. We had a number of nominees. I voted for most of those nominees. I understand that. I'm not expecting Democrats to suddenly start voting against a ton of Democrat nominees. But Joe Biden and this White House are seeking out radicals. And repeatedly, when President Trump made nominees who we deemed outside the mainstream, we said, no, that's not going to cut it. And we actually exercised advise and consent, the constitutional authority of the Senate. I do not understand why Senate Democrats believe they have no responsibility and why they're willing to rubber stamp these nominees, but I would urge every member of this committee to vote against this nomination.
Before recognizing another senator from the Republican side, I'd like to make a statement. It's been my honor to be on this committee for more than 2 decades. This is one of the best committees on Capitol Hill in terms of the opportunity to address issues of the moment and to make a difference in the selection of lifetime appointments for judicial nominations that will impact this country for years forward. I've sat through hundreds and hundreds of these nominations. Under President Biden, it's been close to 200 already. And in the past, like numbers in previous years. I will tell you what happened in this committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, on December the 13th, 2023, to this nominee is a new low in this committee, a new low. What is it about Adil Mangi that attracts such criticism? We know what the starting point is. He would be the first Muslim American to be appointed to serve on the circuit bench. That's an amazing honor. There are only 3 other Muslim American federal judges, and he would have the highest rank among them. And we know because of that he is a target for things that he's done in the past. But like every other nominee, he has to let his life work speak for itself and answer the questions of this committee. So what is this man, and why should we be concerned? You've just heard a presentation, a suggestion that because of his background, he is likely to be either anti-Semitic or a terrorist because he's a Muslim American. anti-Semitic, or a terrorist. He said things over and over again during the course of the hearing where he could not have possibly been twisted to say that he is anti-Semitic. But don't take my word for it, a partisan supporter of President Biden's nominee. Think of one Jewish organization in America that you might turn to ask, what do you think? Is this man's background or statements anti-Semitic? I think it might be the Anti-Defamation League. ADL. We all know them. They've been around a long, long time. Let me read the letter that they wrote to this committee and every member after the questioning, which you've just heard, and similar questions from other Republican nominees. As the leading anti-hate organization in the world, whose mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and treatment for all, ADL is compelled to speak out about the inappropriate and prejudicial treatment of Adil Abdul Mangi, a nominee for U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, during the Judiciary Committee hearing on December 13, 2023. During his confirmation hearing, Mr. Mangi was subjected to aggressive questioning unrelated to his professional expertise or qualifications. Rather, he was forced to provide responses to a wide range of inquiries regarding his views on global strategic considerations in a manner that inappropriately politicized these issues and raised serious questions about pretext and bias. The ADL goes on to report as follows. Just as associating Jewish Americans with certain views or beliefs regarding Israeli government actions would be deemed anti-Semitic, berating the first American Muslim federal appellate judicial nominee with endless questions that appear to have been motivated by bias toward his religions is profoundly wrong. Hate, bias, and bigotry have no place in government, especially in the hallowed halls of Congress. When nominees approach a congressional hearing, their religion, heritage, race, gender, or any other protected identity characteristic should not be the subject for political fodder. This was an attempt to create controversy where it does not exist, the ADL writes. ADL urges leaders to refrain from fueling discrimination and hate and urges the Senate to offer Mr. Mangi a fair vote based on his qualifications and fitness. That wasn't the only Jewish organization. Scores of Jewish organizations have written to us complaining about the way he was treated and supporting his nominations. And here's what the American Jewish Committee said. Mr. Mangi, who will be the first American Muslim to serve in this role, affirmed his belief in Israel's right to exist, his abhorrence of terrorism and any justifications for it, and outright rejection of anti-Semitism from the American Jewish Committee. Let me also report, if I can, that at the end of his questioning by Senator Cruz, I asked Mr. Mangi if he would want to give a complete answer. Here is what he said about the incident involved, the event that has been highlighted over and over again. I'll answer your question very directly, Senator Cruz. I will condemn without equivocation any terrorism, any terrorist, or any act of terrorism, or any defense of any act of terrorism. And this event, I don't know this event, Mr. Mangi said. I don't know anything about this event or who these people are. I've never heard of them. If someone on there is a terrorist, I condemn them. He said that under oath unequivocally. Did you hear that in the response by Senator Cruz? You did not, I'm sure. And so it comes down to the bottom line. Do we have the courage to stand up and say this was wrong, the way this man's been treated? Do we have the courage to say that assuming that everyone of a Muslim faith in America is a suspect terrorist or anti-Semitic? I hope we do. Senator Lee?
Mr. Chairman, I deserve a right to respond to that.
Well, you'll decide that, but I'll decide Senator Lee's
You've
right
impugned my character, and you made an accusation
I read
that was a vicious lie. I'm going to quote from you what you said about me. You said that I had just asked a question, and here's a quote from you, Mr. Chairman, quote, that I had said, he is likely to be anti-Semitic or a terrorist because he is Muslim. Now, you have just impugned my character by making a false accusation, and I will say it is disgraceful. Did you respond to any of the substance of what I said? No. You just attacked me and called me a bigot, and you responded by stating deliberate falsehoods. You said he would be the first Muslim. Well, you know what? I understand. Excuse me. I have a right to defend myself when you impugn my character in a way that is a new low for this committee. You did not dispute any of the facts I said about the organization, that he was an advisor of, he was a donor of, he raised money for. Instead, you said he'd be the first Muslim on the federal court. Well, no, that actually is not correct. And in fact, Mr. Chairman, in fact,
judge.
So the Democrats don't want to defend the substance, so now they're screaming Islamophobia. And I understand playing the race card when anyone disagrees with the Democrats, they scream racist.
I stand by the ADL letter.
But
Senator Lee,
no, I'm going to defend myself because under the Senate rules, you have impugned my character in a way that is blatantly false. And let's just respond with facts, with substance rather than invective. Just recently, Zahid Qureshi was nominated by President Biden, was confirmed by the Senate. Like Mangi, Qureshi is a Pakistani American. He's a Muslim. And he was nominated to serve the people of New Jersey. However, unlike Mangi, he doesn't have association with a radical anti-Semitic group. He doesn't have association with whitewashing terrorism. Rather, Qureshi served in the Army. He was deployed twice to Iraq. He worked for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and he served as a federal prosecutor. And he received 83 votes in the United States Senate for confirmation, the second most under Joe Biden, second only to a nominee from Texas, whom John Cornyn and I recommended. And so it is not the fact that Mr. Mangi is a Muslim that is his problem. It is the fact that his record is extreme. And by the way, if you want to look to Jewish organizations, the Zionist Organization of America has submitted a letter to this committee opposing the nomination. The Coalition for Jewish Values has submitted a letter to this committee opposing the nomination. Stop Anti-Semitism, a nonpartisan organization, has voiced their concerns with Mr. Mangi's affiliation. I want to introduce into the record, I ask unanimous consent to introduce into a record an article from the New York Post entitled, "Biden Judicial Nominee Draws Scrutiny Over Ties to Controversial 9/11 Memorial Event." I responded with substance and fact, and you responded with insults and invective that ignored the substance that Mr. Mangi deliberately associated with a consistently anti-Semitic organization, and yet Democrats are perfectly happy for him to be a federal judge.
I stand by the statement that I read into the record from ADL, and I also stand by
the quote from you was not from ADL.
I stand by the record that I read it into the record, the statement from ADL, and I also stand by what was said under oath by Mr. Mangi after you finished trying to associate him with this organization, that he had no connection with it.
Did you just say he had no connection with this organization? Is that seriously what you said in this hearing? He was on the board of advisors, he was a donor and raised money for him, and you just said he has no connection with him?
See, you twist this situation.
Mr. Chairman, you just said he has no connection with this organization. Is that your view and the view of Senate Democrats?
Read his statement to you.
Is that your view, that he had no connection with this organization?
Senator Lee.
Okay, you're refusing to answer because it's obviously indefensible and false.
Senator Lee.
Mr. Mangi.
Government did not move for a stay of the decision.
Well, Judge Netburn, I'm going to continue on this line of questioning. In your court, what matters more, the rights of individuals or your political ideology?
I apply the law to the facts.
I asked a question, which matters more?
Well, my political ideology doesn't matter at all.
Okay, so I don't believe you. And I think this case demonstrates that you are willing to subjugate the rights of individuals to satisfy your political ideology. This case involves a male defendant who raped a 9-year-old boy. Was he guilty of that?
Yes, the petitioner pled guilty to that.
Okay, so he raped a 9-year-old boy. He also raped a 17-year-old girl. Was he guilty of that?
He pled guilty. The petitioner pled guilty to that crime as well.
So was he guilty?
I hope so, because she pled guilty to it.
He was a he when he did this.
That's correct.
And also criminal deviant conduct, which the record doesn't disclose what that was exactly. Then After serving in prison, Mr. McLean was released for parole, but then violated the terms of parole by having internet and was sent back to prison. 1 year after being released again, he was convicted of having child pornography. Is that correct?
I'm unclear on exactly the time frame that you're at, but the petitioner was convicted of distributing child pornography.
Child pornography that was images of adults violently raping children.
Abhorrent conduct.
Okay.
For which there are real victims.
And this individual, 6'2", biologically a man. A minute ago you said that when this man decided that he was a she, you said this individual was, quote, I wrote it down, sober and entirely a female. That phrase struck me as remarkable. Did this individual have male genitalia?
I think what I said, or at least what
that is a verbatim quote, entirely a female.
Sorry, what I meant to say was hormonally a female.
Okay, but that's not entirely. Did this individual have male genitalia?
Yes.
So you took a 6'2" serial rapist, serial child rapist with male genitalia, and he said, you know, I'd like to be in a women's prison. And your answer was, that sounds great to me. Let me ask you something. The other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Is that a question you're
yes,
asking me?
The other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Of course.
Do they have the right not to have a 6'2" man who is a repeat serial rapist put in as their cellmate?
Senator Cruz, I considered the facts presented to me, and I reached a decision
I asked
based
you a
on what
question.
the law
I asked
is.
you a question. Do they have a right not to have a 6'2" man who is a serial rapist put in as their cellmate? Do those women have a right to that?
Every person who's incarcerated has the right to be safe in their space.
But you didn't think so. You didn't think so. And in fact, I'm going to give some quotes from your order because Senator Kennedy is right. This is not a judge's order. This is a political activist. By the way, the beginning of your order says, at birth, people are typically assigned a gender. I got to say that would astonish a lot of Americans. A lot of Americans think you go to the hospital, a baby is born, and congratulations, you have a little boy, a little girl. The assigned a gender, I know you went to Brown, but it sounds like it's in a college faculty lounge with no bearing on reality. The Bureau of Prison argued what I'm saying right now, that if you put this person in a female prison, there will be a risk of sexual assault to the women. And you know what you did? You said you didn't care about the women. I'm going to quote what you wrote. You wrote, quote, the Bureau of Prisons claim penological interest in protecting female prisoners from sexual violence and trauma. This interest is legitimate, that's kind of you to say, but there are no signs that petitioner is at risk of reoffending. The record is devoid of evidence of incidents of violence or assault during petitioner's incarceration when she was the perpetrator, only the victim. A theoretical risk of sexual assault by the prisoner without more cannot support the BOP's position. No evidence, theoretical. Have you dealt, in what universe is someone who is a serial repeat child rapist not at a risk of reoffending?
Senator, as I do in every case.
Okay, I know you've been told to repeat the line, I follow the law. I asked a question. In what universe is someone who is a serial repeat child rapist not at risk of reoffending?
Sir, I looked at the facts that were before me in this case. All of the evidence, including the statements of every warden who had supervised this petitioner.
You also wrote, the BOP also posits that permitting petitioner to live among women will be traumatizing and possibly dangerous to them. This concern is overblown. I have to say, if I were the father of one of those women, and you decided that my daughter's cellmate was going to be a 6'2" man who over and over and over again committed violent sexual assault, I would say the entire justice system is absurd, and it is clear on your record your political ideology matters a heck of a lot more than the rights of those women that you endangered. I think you're a radical, and I think you have no business being a judge.
Judge Netburn, there was an opportunity during your exchange with Senator Cruz that you were attempting to offer a response relative to the conditions under which this petitioner was unsafe in the facilities in which she was being held. I'd like to offer you the opportunity to finish that response.
So the facts that were presented to me and what I relied on to make my decision were that the petitioner had engaged in no violence, no physical violence, no acts of sexual violence whatsoever while in custody. All three wardens who supervised the petitioner requested that she be transferred to a women's facility because of her serious medical needs. In addition, the Bureau of Prisons' longtime medical provider testified at a 2-day hearing in my courtroom and recommended that the petitioner be transferred because of her serious medical needs. And the last thing I'll say is that the Transgender Executive Council, which is the body that makes decisions on behalf of transgender transfer requests within the Bureau of Prisons, never said that the petitioner could not be transferred, and never ever said that she couldn't be transferred because of any risk of violence. What the Transgender Executive Council repeatedly said in denying the request was simply that she needed to maintain her hormone levels. That was the repeated justification for the denial of transfer. But the petitioner had reached full female hormone levels before even being incarcerated. At the time, the district judge in Indiana who sentenced the petitioner requested that she be placed in a women's facility. Her hormones were entirely female at that point, and so the decision by the Transgender Executive Council to deny the transfer request based on this idea that it was only because her hormones needed to be consistent and stabilized, I found was a pretext, but they never once said she cannot be transferred because of violence. It was always based on this idea that her hormones had to be transferred.
Thank you, Judge Netburn. Senator Padilla.
Judge Netburn, that's
Senator
directly contrary to what your report
you all
said.
have
That is
had
directly
No.
You're going to follow up.
We're going to
You're going to follow up, and that's how it works.
There is not.
That is exactly how it works.
Look,
If you follow up, you didn't get extra time, and she just directly contradicted her own report. I'm just going to read her own words because it's exactly the opposite of what she said. Your own report.
Senators, I gave both of you more time to finish your line of questioning. I allowed the witness to finish her. I allowed the witness to finish her response. I allowed the witness to finish her response. That is,
I understand that you're scared of the facts.
I have
Senator Padilla. Madam Chair,
open up testimony and then
she has an obligation to explain why she directly contradicted what she wrote in her report. She says in her report, the Bureau of Prisons' claimed penological interest is in protecting female prisoners from sexual violence and trauma. She just told you the Bureau of Prisons didn't say there was a concern about sexual violence and trauma. Those are directly contradictory, and why are you contradicting what you wrote in your report?
And what are you trying to hide, Madam Chair?
No,
wait, point of order.
Senator Padilla. Senator Padilla.
Are you going to let her answer that question?
Senator
Or you
Padilla.
don't want her to answer that question?
Senator
You're
Padilla.
afraid?
Very much, Madam Chair.
Senator
You're
Padilla.
afraid of the answer to
This
that
is
question?
no cover-up.
Are you
Senator
afraid
Padilla.
of the answer to that question?
Senator Padilla.
So yes, you are afraid of the answer to that question.
Senator Padilla.
Please hold
Clearly,
my
you're
time.
afraid of the answer to that question.
This is
Thank you.
absurd.
Two of the nominees before us, appreciate your patience and your dignity.
Gretchen Carlson for being here today and inspiring a lot of the effort.
Speaking of ageless, I want to thank Senator Grassley for
What a comparison.
helping me get this thing moving. And he's had a midlife crisis. And he's going to solve it right here in front of us, and we're going to get this bill over the line.
That is regular order for sure. We turn to the votes on nominations. The first is Kevin Ritz, nominated to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. I'd like to briefly comment on his nomination. During the hearing, members of the committee questioned him about a complaint submitted to the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility in connection with his representation of a case. Mr. Ritz has stated that he was not aware of the complaint. In fact, he reiterated under repeated questioning by members of the committee. One member even went so far as to accuse Mr. Ritz of lying to the committee. As I mentioned yesterday, that would be a federal crime when you're under oath. No evidence was produced to suggest he was lying. In fact, this accusation was untrue, unfounded, and wholly inappropriate. Here are the facts, as Mr. Ritz explained at the hearing and as we followed up to find to be true. He did not receive notice from the Office of Professional Responsibility regarding any letter of complaint. This is presumably because OPR determined the complaint was meritless and dismissed it. As OPR itself says on its website, and I quote, "Most complaints received by OPR are determined not to warrant further review because, for example, the complaint on its face appears to be without merit or is unsupported by any evidence." This is the most important sentence. In such cases, OPR will close the matter without informing the subject attorney of the complaint. Notably, the defense attorney represented to the court during the case in question that she was not accusing Mr. Ritz of any misconduct. In fact, no allegations of misconduct against Mr. Ritz were ever substantiated. The judge in this case stated, and I quote, "The record does not reflect a determination by the court adverse in any way to Mr. Ritz. I need that to be absolutely clear," the judge said. Given these facts, the treatment of Mr. Ritz by some members of the committee was disappointing. His nomination to be U.S. Attorney was voice voted out of this committee in 2022. Notably, he enjoyed the strong support of his home state senators at the time. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Mr. Ritz's nomination?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you. And I'm not going to take up the committee's time today to rehash the White House's history of not working with Senator Hagerty and I on these judicial nominees. But I do want to say this. The White House rushed through a backroom deal to put Kevin Ritz in this seat. And by so doing, they have nominated a man whose lack of professional ethics unquestionably disqualifies him from federal judicial service. And for all of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who care about indigent criminal defendants, who care about preserving criminal defendants' constitutional rights, and who care about supporting our federal public defenders, you should be very concerned by the prospect of Mr. Ritz serving as a federal judge. I know that my Democratic colleagues believe in the American ideal that every individual accused of a crime is entitled to due process of the law. But that's not how Kevin Ritz operates as a prosecutor. Mr. Ritz uses bait-and-switch tactics to trick indigent criminal defendants into accepting plea deals they didn't agree to. He leaves his written plea agreements intentionally vague, lures indigent criminal defendants and public defenders into an oral agreement, and then pulls the rug out from under them in court. And when a female defense attorney finally called Mr. Ritz out on his unethical conduct, he tried to defame and discredit her. In fact, Mr. Ritz was removed from that case because of his unethical behavior. The prosecutor who replaced him went so far as to say on the record that the allegations of Mr. Ritz's professional conduct, and I quote, are serious and are taken so seriously by our office that Mr. Ritz will be taken off the case, end quote. And this wasn't just one case. Mr. Ritz's reputation for unethical behavior is well known across the Tennessee bar. Just ask Stephen Shankman, the former federal public defender for the Western District of Tennessee. Mr. Ritz's ethical misdeeds are so well known that when Mr. Shankman first heard reports of a prosecutor behaving unethically, he knew it had to be Kevin Ritz. In an email warning other defense attorneys about Mr. Ritz, Mr. Shankman said, and I quote, "This is not the first, second, third, or whatever occasion that this sort of thing has occurred, but everyone should be aware of this unfortunate pattern of behavior. You should be aware, your clients should be aware, and you should proceed with extreme caution," end quote. You should proceed with extreme caution. I'd like my colleagues across the aisle to think about that one.
Is that how you want indigent criminal defendants and public defenders to feel when they enter an American courtroom and Mr. Ritz is the presiding judge? I would hope you do not want that. Mr. Ritz has a history, unfortunately, of lying to the federal courts, lying to federal public defenders, and lying to indigent criminal defendants. And during his confirmation hearing, Mr. Ritz lied to the committee. Mr. Chairman, I do not believe that Mr. Ritz has the judgment or professional ethics to be a federal judge. It is deeply, deeply disappointing to me. We had asked to work with the White House. We know what has transpired here, and I hope my colleagues across the aisle who are concerned about unethical federal prosecutors trampling on defendants' constitutional rights will join me in opposing this nomination.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Before recognizing Senator Tillis, I would like to make this point. The committee has received many letters of support for Ritz's nomination, including members of the defense bar in Tennessee. I want my colleagues to listen to this one sentence. One letter from the federal defender of the Western District of Tennessee said of Mr. Ritz, I quote, a fair person of integrity, and notice his, quote, perfect temperament to serve as a judicial officer. That comes from the federal defender in Western District of Tennessee. Another letter from a criminal defense attorney who served as opposing counsel in cases with Ritz described him as, quote, intelligent, honest, hardworking, and fair. Before we make allegations of any witness before us lying to this committee, recall that they are under oath and that would involve possible criminal action. I would be very careful in using that term myself. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This morning.
Thank you.
Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tomorrow, I think we're going to vote on the immigration bill. One thing I would like to point out is that legislation is not required to do most of what needs to be done. It just requires will. So we're going to have a vote tomorrow, and it's just a vote to try to help your side politically on the border. I don't think it's going to work. The average number of people granted parole by the Trump administration and the Obama administration was about 6,000 a year. Now, what is parole? It's executive authority granted by statute that the executive, through the Secretary of Homeland Security, can parole people into the country on a limited basis based on a unique humanitarian need, somebody's mother's dying, or special benefit to the country, maybe a witness in a case. That was used about 6,000 times a year under the Trump-Obama administration. It has been incredibly abused. Since we last voted in February of this year on the bill that's going to be brought back up, 77,000 people have been paroled. There's not any change at all, and it's never going to change. So you could have demonstrated, the administration could have, taking this matter more seriously when brought up by our colleagues. Go back to the statute. You're abusing the statute. You're mass paroling people. You're waving them in. And we found that Mr. Barra, the man who's been indicted for killing the young woman in Georgia, was released through parole, not based on a humanitarian need or special benefit of the country, because El Paso was full. The man that's accused of killing Laken Riley was let go by DHS because they had no place to put him, and he was paroled. That's not a statutory requirement. I am never going to vote for immigration reform until this administration proves to me they're serious about the job they have and are going to change the behavior. And apparently they're not going to change the behavior. It's getting worse, not better. 77,000 people paroled
once you know that Republicans believe you abused the statute, we're supposed to believe you're going to do something new if we change the law? It's not a law problem. It's an attitude problem. Thank you.
We're checking on this, Senator Graham, but do you believe the Ukrainian refugees were paroled into this country?
I believe that it should be done. You don't rewrite the law. You have asylum. You have refugee status. Refugees have to apply overseas. So if you feel like you're a refugee from a war in Ukraine, you apply for refugee status. You don't use parole. Parole was not meant to become an alternative to refugees.
We're double checking. I'm not sure, and I don't want to make an assertion that turns out to be wrong for the record, but 36,000 Ukrainian refugees have come to the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois under two conditions: a sponsoring family, and second, that they're given a work permit when they arrive. I will tell you those people have been folded into the economy of the Chicago region without incident. I don't think there's any press reporting about their presence. I think it's the right thing to do to offer people who are refugees in a war an opportunity to come to the United States. We did it after Vietnam. We've done it with our allies among the Kurds. I don't think it's an unusual circumstance in history. So I don't think that this necessarily tells the whole story.
Well, if I may, you're talking about A and I'm talking about B. I support raising the gap for refugees. We had a meeting about it. You know, it's like 125,000. I supported raising the cap. You have to apply for refugee status overseas. And there are people, I'm sure the people you described in Ukraine were very worthy of being refugees. I'm not talking about refugees, I'm talking about parole. Parole is being used in a way the statute never contemplated. It's being abused. And here's what I don't get. After one of the people you paroled illegally, Mr. Beer, killed a young lady in Georgia, they're continuing to do the same thing. So I support refugee programs. I support asylum that's applied correctly. I don't support mass abuse of parole. And from the last time we took the vote to now, things are worse, not better. Thank you.
We've checked. They were paroled. Ukrainian refugees were paroled into the United States under the
Well,
president's
they violated that. They should have been refugees, not paroled. You just can't just ignore the law. I guess you can. That's why we're all going to vote no. You can and you are. So there you go.
We were voting on a bill which was characterized as a bipartisan bill. I hope it will be on the floor. So Senator Schumer wanted to be here to make an introduction, and I am going to read his statement. Unfortunately, he was called away at the last minute, and so I'm reading Senator Schumer's statement into the record. Visit would certainly be worth our while. Under the early arrival rule, Senator Blackburn, you're recognized next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And, you know, many of us do visit prisons. And one of the things that repeatedly comes up is the number of repeat offenders and how difficult soft-on-crime policies have made it on our local law enforcement agencies in the judicial system, and also the effect of fentanyl on communities. When you look at those that are incarcerated, the number that are there because of drugs and mental health issues, those are issues we should be doing a deeper dive on. And Chairman Senator Graham mentioned how he was surprised we were taking our time today to talk about solitary confinement when we should be talking about H.R. 2, a border security bill. Number one issue with the American people right now is what is happening with that open border. Every town's a border town. Every state is a border state because of the effects of the Biden open border policy. It is all intentional. It is what they wanted. And it's what our colleagues across the aisle continue to support. Fentanyl racing into this country. We should be looking at that, Mr. Chairman. None of us want that in our communities. Look at the number of children that are being exploited by cartels that are trafficking children, and they're being trafficked into labor gangs. They're being sexually exploited. These are things that are happening, and I wish that we were putting our time into that. Now, back when I was in the House in 2007, I introduced a bill, the CLEAR Act, and it would take some of those provisions from the 287G program and give authority to local law enforcement. When they apprehend somebody that is in the country illegally, they can hold them. And then ICE has to come and ICE has to deport them and then reimburse that local law enforcement agency for what they have spent. So, Sheriff, I want to come to you, and thank you to each of you for being here today. I appreciate it. I would like to get your thoughts on legislation like the CLEAR Act that would empower local law enforcement and then have ICE deport these criminal illegal aliens and reimburse local law enforcement for what they have spent, and deny federal law enforcement funds to jurisdictions that will not comply with federal immigration law.
Senator, what you're talking about is not something new or revolutionary. We had that at one time. If I remember right, it was somewhere around
287G.
Well, even before then, even before 287G, in the 1980s and 1990s, we had officers at the Victoria Police Department who were dual commissioned as U.S. Customs agents and local police officers. And they had the authorities that you're talking about. And so the restitution of those authorities is something that can be looked at by federal authorities. And so I think that we all have to work together and do our part, because this open border that we're facing right now and the surge of transnational criminal activity is overwhelming us. I heard one of the senators early say that most of the fentanyl is being brought in by United States citizens, and that is not correct. If you lived down on the border like I am, then what you'll find is that is being brought here by transnational criminal organizations. Some of the people that work for cartels do live in the United States, but that product is being shipped here by cartel members from Mexico into the United States. They no longer are dependent on China for the precursors to make fentanyl. They have now figured out how to make it themselves. Those individuals in Mexico are some of the smartest people you'll ever meet, and they will figure out exactly what to do in order to generate a profit. And I think that we need to look at the ability to deny transnational criminal activity and organizations any ability to make profit within the United States, because I don't know if any of you have ever sat down with a Sicario before. I have on multiple occasions. When you talk about solitary confinement, as it's being called here, we call it separation in the state of Texas. Those people have to remain in separation or they will kill somebody. It's not like the movie. They're not professionals. They're sloppy and they're mean. And we have to deal with them in a manner that protects not only our correction officers, but also the fellow inmates that are in the facility, because it doesn't matter if you're a jailer or an inmate, you're made in the image of God, and I have to protect you no matter what.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator, in previous stage of the hearing, we had a similar request that we deal with legislation that addresses border issues. And I, for one, would like to remember that it was Senator Langford's effort that resulted in a bipartisan bill, which many of us actively supported.
Mr. Chairman, as we know, that was not a border security bill. It was an immigration bill, and H.R. 2, which is a border security bill, landed in this committee last May. Last May, the first part of May.
Let me just say, Senator.
We should have a hearing on that, whether we like it or not.
Senator.
Let's take it up and let's debate it and look at what has transpired at this border. I talk to parents every single week who have had a child impacted by by fentanyl and people that are seeing some of these labor gangs. I am terribly concerned about these 85,000 children that HHS and DHS can't find.
Well, we can go into all of these issues, and we have in the past, but I will tell you that the bipartisan effort by Senator Langford, the chosen representative of the Senate Republicans, along with Senator Murphy and Senator Sinema, was the first bipartisan effort that moved us towards 60 votes, which is essential for passage in the Senate.
And it couldn't get
It got
where it needed to go.
four Republicans after they told us
It was
point
not
blank.
a border security
Well,
bill.
I tell you, you're wrong.
And I want, well,
You're wrong,
no, sir,
Senator.
I am not wrong
And
on
HR
that. It
2
was an
received no
immigration
Democratic
bill.
votes. I don't want to go down these rabbit holes of
The American
partisan-
people are expecting us to do it. That's why they want a trial
Well,
on Mayorkas. And I think it is so wrong that
You're
Chuck
giving me-
Schumer
you're
is
gi-
trying to table
I can't
this.
keep up with all the issues you're throwing at me, Senator. We came today to talk about solitary confinement in federal prisons, and I hope we can get back to that subject. At this point, served in a variety of roles within the office and as appellate chief. He personally wrote more than 200 briefs and argued 37 federal appeals. After receiving blue slips from both Tennessee senators, Mr. Ritz was confirmed by the Senate to be U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Tennessee by a voice vote in September of 2022. In that role, he serves as the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer for the 22 counties of the district and supervises the other attorneys in the office. As U.S. Attorney, Mr. Ritz created the National Security and Civil Rights Unit within the criminal division of his office. He also regularly meets with and convenes law enforcement and community partners to discuss violent crime reduction efforts and other priorities. I congratulate Mr. Ritz and his family on his nomination and look forward to hearing his testimony today. Senator Blackburn is asked to make remarks, and I now recognize her for 3 minutes. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by saying just how disappointed I am that the Biden administration has once again shown little regard for the long-standing bipartisan tradition of consulting home state senators on judicial nominees. Senator Hagerty and I attempted to work in good faith with the administration. We identified highly qualified nominees to fill this vacancy, but unfortunately, the White House had other plans. It is abundantly clear that despite the White House assurances to the contrary, there was a backroom deal to appoint Mr. Ritz to this vacancy from the very start. But the most glaring example of the White House outright refusal to consult is the fact that they have not even bothered to ask what our objections to Mr. Ritz might be. Had they done so, I would have explained my serious concerns about his professional ethics, concerns that should alarm those in the White House pushing his nomination, and concerns that we have heard from many of his peers. In our country, every individual accused of a crime is entitled to due process under the law. That is a bedrock principle of justice. But that's not how Mr. Ritz has operated as a prosecutor. Mr. Ritz has been accused of using highly unethical bait-and-switch tactics to trick indigent criminal defendants into accepting plea deals they didn't agree to. And when defense attorneys pushed back, Mr. Ritz has been accused of making outright false statements to the court to cover up his misdeeds. Indeed, Mr. Ritz has chosen to surround himself with those who seemingly treat their ethical obligations with disdain. Mr. Ritz's deputy, for example, received a 1-year probation for prosecutorial misconduct. We have heard from many of his peers and colleagues. You don't have to take my word for it. Just ask Stephen Shankman, the former federal public defender for the Western District of Tennessee. Mr. Ritz has such a reputation for unethical behavior that when Mr. Shankman first heard reports of a prosecutor behaving unethically, he knew it had to be Kevin Ritz. Writing about Mr. Ritz, Mr. Shankman said, and I quote, "This is not the first, second, third, or whatever occasion that this sort of thing has occurred, but everyone should be aware of this unfortunate pattern of behavior. You should be aware, your clients should be aware, and you should proceed with extreme caution," end quote. You should proceed with extreme caution. What an admonition. Is that how the American citizen should be made to feel if they were to go into a courtroom with the presiding judge being Kevin Ritz? With an ethical record like this, I question how the ABA could give him any rating other than not qualified. He has no business representing the United States in a courtroom, let alone presiding as a judge with a lifetime appointment. But Mr. Ritz's record of unethical behavior isn't my only objection. Under his watch, as the chief federal law enforcement officer, the city of Memphis has become the most dangerous place to live in the United States. That is a fact. In 2023, Memphis had the most homicides in its history, and data shows that 2024 homicides are going to outpace 2023. Law and order has completely collapsed in Memphis under his leadership, and there is no more tragic example than last week's murder of a Memphis police officer. Officer Joseph McKinney was shot and killed on Friday by a criminal who had been arrested just weeks prior for 4 felonies, including unlawful possession of a weapon and possession of an illegal Glock switch. Make no mistake, the criminal would not have been out on the streets but for Mr. Ritz falling asleep at the wheel. His inaction has cost lives. Prior to Mr. Ritz's tenure, the U.S. Attorney's Office had a policy of charging 100% of prosecutable gun crimes. Why Mr. Ritz did not follow through on this, I do not understand. But we do know a police officer, a father, and a Memphian, they are dead because of Mr. Ritz's lack of leadership.
Senator, your time
Thank
has
you,
expired.
Mr. Chairman.
Let me say at the outset that Mr. Ritz will be before this committee for questions from all senators and have an opportunity to respond. Senator Blackburn asked for this special privilege of speaking out of turn, and I gave it to her and extended her time an additional 2 or 3 minutes in an effort to accommodate her in a fair fashion. Let me say at the outset, Mr. Ritz has been judged by the American Bar Association. To judge him and his prospective nomination, they contacted attorneys in the area as well as judges. Their conclusion, unanimously well qualified. Unanimously well qualified. If that sounds different than what you just heard, it is. Second, I want to address this notion that we have some kind of backroom deal here. The senator has been selective in talking about the facts that led to this nomination. Let me tell you the history. It takes a minute or two, but it's worth it. As many of you may know in this room, blue slips are literally blue slips of paper issued by this committee as a courtesy in order to seek input from colleagues on nominees from their home states. During the Obama administration, Senator Leahy chaired the committee and honored blue slips for both circuit and district court nominations. If a senator did not return a blue slip for a nomination from his state or her state, that individual nominee did not move forward. That was the tradition under Senator Leahy. As a result, Senate Republicans held multiple circuit seats open during the Obama administration that President Trump later filled. Both parties do that. But when Senate Democrats expressed reservations with President Trump's picks for circuit seats in their states, Senate Republicans reversed their thinking. They did away, the Republicans when they were in charge, did away with blue slips for circuit court vacancies and held hearings on 18 circuit court nominees who did not receive blue slips from their home state senators. I objected at the time, as did many of my colleagues, but we also repeatedly warned the Republicans were establishing new ground rules when it came to blue slips for circuit court judges. I've said it many times, there cannot be one set of rules for Republican nominees and another for Democratic nominees. So today and throughout this session, I am following the same standard the Senate Republicans set. Senate Republicans confirmed a nominee to the Third Circuit after the Trump White House refused to let Democratic home state senators even meet with him. Another Third Circuit nominee was informed that he would be nominated weeks before the Trump White House had a single conversation about the vacancy with Senator Casey of Pennsylvania. And the Trump White House counsel informed Senator Baldwin of Wisconsin during their very first conversation about a Seventh Circuit vacancy at the White House that they'd already selected a nominee without her knowledge. That doesn't seem like much consultation to me, but Senate Republicans said it was plenty. Given that history, the White House consulted with the Tennessee senators on this very vacancy, significantly more than precedent requires. The White House has been discussing this Senate seat with the Tennessee senators since August of 2023. They exchanged names of potential candidates in October of 2023. Mr. Ritz interviewed with members of the Tennessee senators' staffs in both October and November 2023. The White House counsel's office interviewed the Tennessee senators' suggested candidates in November of 2023. The White House then gave the Tennessee senators the opportunity to choose from 3 candidates, including Mr. Ritz. The Tennessee senators refused to do so. The White House also repeatedly offered the Tennessee senators the opportunity to interview Mr. Ritz. Senator Blackburn did not take them up on the offer until March of this year, and Senator Haggerty did not conduct an interview of Mr. Ritz until yesterday. My Democratic colleagues would have been grateful to receive such courtesy from the Trump White House. But what did Senator Blackburn offer instead? Calling this a backroom deal. Senators Blackburn and Haggerty may have preferred another individual for the vacancy, but consistent with precedent set by former Republican chairs of the committee, we will proceed with a hearing for Mr. Ritz. It's now time to call
Mr. Chairman, there are inaccuracies in your statement. I'll be happy to submit a timeline and the fact that on Christmas Eve we received an email that they were going to nominate Mr. Ritz, but I'll submit those in writing for you.
Thank you very much, Senator. First panel is Mr. Ritz, and will you please approach the table as they change the nameplates.
Chair recognizes Senator Durban.
Thanks, Senator Welch, and thank you to the nominees. And let me say at the outset, for those who are not familiar with the process, it is a long process where a lot of people investigate your life in detail. Questions are asked about things that you'd long ago forgotten, and you're asked to defend things which you thought were in the obscure past, but not so when it comes to the investigators. We have had people questioned about poetry they wrote in college that betrayed the fact they were truly Marxist and have been their whole lives, and they didn't realize it. That's the sort of thing. Then they go through the investigative phase of your preparation for this moment, and the American Bar Association steps in and asks every attorney who will answer the phone or answer a phone call or request for information what you're really like and what they can say about you personally and privately. And at the end of that process, I might say that both of these nominees were found well qualified by the American Bar Association, well qualified, which meant that your adversaries who had a chance in anonymity to say what they really believed said nice things, which is a good reflection on your lives. What I found struck by as I look at both of your backgrounds, what an enormous amount of court experience you've had. That's rare in these days, at least as I'm told, as I've been removed from practice myself. Few cases end up in court, few cases end up at trial. It looks like Mrs. Lanthier, did I pronounce that correctly? Tried between nearly 50 criminal cases to a jury verdict. 50 cases to a jury verdict. I hope you're getting ready to write a book about it. Tell me about that experience. What's been your biggest surprise when it comes to jury response?
Thank you, Senator. I'm such a fan of the jury system that we have. I think what surprises me the most every single time is the dedication and the drive that jurors take to really do the job well. They listen to the evidence, they listen to the judge's instruction, and they take their obligation seriously in the most serious of cases and in the most, what may seem insignificant to you and me, but is the most important to the person next to me. It is clear to those clients that the jurors have taken their job seriously. It truly is the bedrock of our justice system, Senator.
Ms. Henry, you've had similar experience representing clients at every stage of the state criminal process. Any observations, philosophical in nature?
Thank you, Senator. I agree with what my colleague said about the importance of the jury system. I think it's what makes our country unique and have the best system anywhere, I think. And I also think what you're right is about trying a case before a jury is not something a lot of people have an opportunity to do, especially in federal court. And I've had dozens of juries in federal court in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. So one of the things I like to do when I'm mentoring my students, my law students, is I make sure every trial I have that I allow a law student to sit and be part of that trial and to be involved in writing the openings, writing the closings, prepping the witnesses. And I feel like that's the one thing I can give them that maybe another lawyer can't give them. And they've come back to me later when they've been working at big firms and making tons of money. And they've come back and said sometimes they'll have a partner meeting and they'll say, who's tried a case in federal court? And theirs might be the only hand that gets to go up and say, it was me, I've tried a case in federal court. So I think it's unfortunately not as frequent as I'd like it to be, but it's so important. And it really is a way to see our justice system at work.
So the next thing you may have noticed in the Biden administration is women play a larger role in the selection process in this committee. Some people admire that and some resent it very much. We find it in lines of questioning which seem to have a prejudice to believe that women cannot be good prosecutors. Whether you have been or not, and both of you have defense backgrounds, what is your response to the argument that you're going to be soft on crime? Ms. Lanthier?
Senator, I have represented individuals who have been the victims of crime. I have seen the impact that crime can have on folks. My job right now is to, in this system, and a system that I take great pride in, is to represent those individuals. Were I to be confirmed, I would take my same commitment to the system and do that job. I would apply the appropriate law to the facts of the case before me.
Ms. Henry?
Yes, Senator, I agree with that. Not only have a lot of our clients also been victims of crime, but we sit in court all day, every day, and we listen to victims face to face. We listen to the things they say, and it is impossible not to be moved by how difficult and how enduring some of the trauma that victims of crime face. And we feel that. We see it on the front lines every day. And if I was fortunate enough to be confirmed, I would think about that and all of the experiences I've had in the criminal justice system and use that to make sure that everyone is receiving equal treatment under the law.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Senator Kennedy.